Hello friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. My name is Gideon Brackett. I'm 62 years old, and I've been driving commercial trucks for 41 years. That's more than half my life spent behind the wheel of a Kenworth, watching America scroll past my windshield 1 mile marker at a time. I've hauled everything you can imagine across every state in the lower 48. Lumber, livestock, electronics, furniture, frozen goods, construction equipment. You name it, I've probably moved it. I know the interstates like most people know their own neighborhood. I know which rest stops have the cleanest bathrooms, which truck stops water down their coffee, and which stretches of highway to avoid during certain times of year. After 4 decades, the road stops being a job and becomes something else. It becomes a part of you, like a second language you don't even think about speaking anymore. But every career has an end. Mine was supposed to come quietly. No drama, no fanfare, just a final delivery, and then I'd hand in my keys, collect my last paycheck, and spend the rest of my days in a little house outside Tucson with my daughter and her family nearby. That was the plan. One last load, then retirement. Clean, simple, dignified. I'd been counting down the weeks, then the days, and finally the hours until that last run. The company I work for, a mid-sized freight outfit called Silverton Transport out of Albuquerque, even gave me the choice of route for my final haul. I picked something easy: auto parts from Flagstaff, Arizona, to a distribution center just outside Barstow, California. Straightforward run, mostly Interstate 40, then a quick jog south. Nothing complicated. I'd done that route 100 times, maybe more. It was a milk run, the kind of job you could do with your eyes half closed. Perfect for a victory lap. I picked up the load on a Thursday afternoon in early October. The weather was good, clear skies and temperatures in the low 70s. The kind of day that makes you feel like everything's going to work out just fine. I did my pre-trip inspection like I always do, checking the tires, the lights, the brake lines, making sure the trailer was properly secured and the load was balanced. Everything checked out. I signed the paperwork, shook hands with the dock supervisor, and pulled out of the yard just before 3 p.m. The plan was to drive through the evening, catch some sleep at a rest area somewhere past Needles, and finish the run in the morning. Easy. I remember feeling light that afternoon, almost giddy. Not because I was leaving trucking behind, but because I was leaving it on my own terms. No accidents, no injuries, no forced retirement due to health or age. I was walking away clean, and that felt like a victory in itself. The first few hours went exactly as expected. I merged onto I-40 westbound and settled into the rhythm of the road. My rig was a 2019 Kenworth T680, one of the newer models in the fleet, and it handled like a dream. A smooth ride, quiet cab, all the modern amenities. I had my CB radio on, tuned to channel 19, listening to the chatter from other drivers. Most of it was the usual stuff: traffic updates, complaints about construction zones, jokes about dispatchers. I chimed in a few times, let a couple of guys know about a speed trap near Winslow, and got a thanks in return. The sun started to sink lower in the sky as I passed through Holbrook, painting the desert in shades of orange and red. It was beautiful in that stark, lonely way the Southwest can be. I'd seen it 1,000 times, but it never got old. There's something about the desert at sunset that makes you feel small, like you're just a speck moving across the surface of something ancient and indifferent. It's humbling, and I'd always appreciated that. By the time I reached the New Mexico border, the sun had fully set. The sky faded from deep purple to black, and the stars began to appear, more of them than you'd ever see in a city. Out here, away from the lights, the night sky looks like someone spilled diamonds across a velvet cloth. I kept the radio on, but the chatter had died down. Most drivers were either parked for the night or focused on their own hauls. I switched over to a classic country station and let the music fill the cab. Merle Haggard, Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, the old stuff, the good stuff. It felt right for the occasion, like a soundtrack to the end of an era. I wasn't sentimental by nature, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a tug in my chest as I listened to those songs and watched the highway unspool in front of me. This was it, the last time I'd do this. The last time I'd feel the rumble of the engine beneath me, the last time I'd watch the white lines blur into a continuous stream, the last time I'd be alone with my thoughts in the open road. It was bittersweet, but mostly it just felt right. Around 9:30 p.m., I was approaching the town of Sanders, a tiny place that's barely a dot on the map. It sits right on the border between New Mexico and Arizona, and most people blow through it without a second thought. I'd stopped there a few times over the years, usually just to fuel up or grab a soda from the gas station. There's not much to it, just a handful of buildings, a railroad crossing, and a whole lot of empty space. That night, as I passed through, I noticed the gas station was closed, which struck me as odd. It was a Thursday night, not even that late, and the place should have been open, but the lights were off and the parking lot was empty. I shrugged it off. Maybe they'd had a power outage or decided to close early for some reason. It wasn't my problem. I kept driving, pressing westward into Arizona, and that's when things started to feel different. It's hard to explain exactly what changed, but I felt it in my gut. The air in the cab seemed to grow heavier, thicker, like the pressure had shifted. My ears popped, the way they do when you're driving through mountains and changing elevation quickly, but the road here was flat as a pancake. I glanced at the dashboard, checking the gauges. Everything looked normal. Engine temperature, oil pressure, fuel level, all right where they should be. I adjusted the air conditioning, thinking maybe the cab was getting stuffy, but that didn't help. The feeling persisted, a low-level unease that settled in my chest and wouldn't leave. I told myself it was just nerves, maybe a little anxiety about the fact that this was my last run. It made sense. Big life changes can mess with your head, make you feel things that aren't really there. I tried to shake it off, focus on the road, but the feeling clung to me like a shadow. The highway stretched out in front of me, a long, straight line cutting through the desert. There were no other vehicles in sight, no headlights in my mirrors, no taillights ahead. I was completely alone, which wasn't unusual for this stretch, especially at night. But the isolation felt more pronounced than normal, almost oppressive. The darkness outside the cab seemed deeper, blacker, like it was pressing in against the windows. I turned up the radio, hoping the music would help, but the signal started to fade, replaced by static and the occasional burst of Spanish-language talk radio. I switched stations, scanning through the FM band, but everything was either static or too weak to hear clearly. Finally, I just turned it off. The silence that followed was almost worse, broken only by the hum of the engine and the whir of the tires on the asphalt. That's when I saw him. He was standing on the shoulder of the road, maybe a quarter-mile ahead, just outside the reach of my headlights. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by a road sign or a piece of debris. But as I got closer, the shape resolved into a person. A man, standing perfectly still, facing the highway. He wasn't waving, wasn't trying to flag me down, just standing there. I eased off the accelerator slightly, my foot hovering over the brake. Every instinct I had told me to keep going, to drive past him and not look back. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the fact that this was the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town, and the temperature had already dropped into the 50s. Maybe it was the simple human decency that says you don't leave someone stranded in the desert at night. Or maybe it was something else, something I can't quite put my finger on. Whatever the reason, I slowed down. As I drew closer, I got a better look at him. He was tall, maybe 6'2" or 6'3", and thin, almost gaunt. He wore a dark coat that hung loosely on his frame, and a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face in shadow. His hands were shoved into his pockets, and he stood with a slight slouch, like he'd been waiting there for a long time. There was something about his posture, something off, but I couldn't articulate what it was. I pulled the rig over onto the shoulder, the air brakes hissing as I came to a stop about 20 feet past him. I put the truck in neutral, set the parking brake, and glanced in my side mirror. He was still standing there, motionless, not making any move to approach. I sat there for a moment, debating. Part of me wanted to just pull back onto the highway and forget I'd ever seen him. But another part, the part that had been shaped by 4 decades of life on the road, told me I couldn't do that. I'd given rides to stranded motorists before, helped people change tires, called for help when someone was in trouble. It's what you do. It's part of the code. I opened the door and climbed down from the cab. The night air hit me immediately, cold and dry, carrying with it the faint smell of creosote and dust. I walked around the front of the truck, my boots crunching on the gravel, and approached the man. He still hadn't moved. Up close, I could see more details. His coat was old, worn at the edges, and his boots were scuffed and dusty, like he'd been walking for miles. His face was still hidden beneath the brim of his hat, but I could make out the line of his jaw, the pale skin of his neck. He looked like someone out of another time, like a figure from an old Western film who'd wandered onto the wrong set. "You need a ride?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral, friendly but cautious. He didn't respond right away. For a long moment, he just stood there, and I began to think maybe he hadn't heard me. But then, slowly, he lifted his head. His face came into view, and I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. His eyes were wrong. Not obviously wrong, not in a way that would make you scream and run, but wrong enough that your brain stumbles over it, trying to make sense of what it's seeing. They were too dark, like pools of ink, with no visible pupils or irises. They reflected the light from my truck's headlights in a way that human eyes shouldn't, almost like the eyes of an animal caught in a beam. His skin was pale, almost gray, and pulled tight over his skull, giving him a skeletal appearance. His lips were thin and bloodless, and when he spoke, his voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but it carried in the still night air. "I appreciate it," he said. His tone was flat, emotionless, like he was reading from a script. "I've been waiting a long time." There was something about the way he said it that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I've been waiting a long time. Not waiting for a ride, not waiting for help, just waiting. Like he'd been expecting me specifically. I forced a smile, trying to shake off the unease. "Where you headed?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly as if considering the question. "Same direction as you," he said. Another non-answer. I should have told him no. I should have made some excuse, said I wasn't allowed to pick up hitchhikers, company policy or something. But the words didn't come. Instead, I found myself nodding. "All right," I said. "Climb on in." He moved then, stepping past me with a slow measured gait. There was no urgency in his movements, no relief or gratitude, just a mechanical progression toward the truck. I followed him, watching as he opened the passenger door and pulled himself up into the cab with surprising ease for someone who looked so frail. I climbed back into the driver's seat and shut my door, and suddenly the cab felt smaller, more cramped, even though there was plenty of room. He sat in the passenger seat, his hands folded in his lap, staring straight ahead through the windshield. He didn't buckle his seatbelt, didn't adjust the seat, didn't say a word. I released the parking brake, shifted into gear, and pulled back onto the highway. The engine roared to life, and the truck picked up speed, the headlights carving a tunnel through the darkness ahead. I kept my eyes on the road, but I was acutely aware of his presence beside me. He didn't move, didn't fidget, didn't even seem to breathe. The silence between us was thick and uncomfortable, and I felt compelled to fill it. "Name's Gideon," I said, glancing at him briefly. "Gideon Brackett." He didn't respond, didn't even turn his head. I waited a beat, then tried again. "You got a name?" This time, he did turn, slowly, like his neck was on a hinge. His dark eyes fixed on me, and for a moment, I felt like I was staring into something vast and empty. "Lyle," he said, finally. "Lyle Corbett." "Nice to meet you, Lyle," I said, though it felt like a lie. "What were you doing out there?" He turned back to the windshield. "Waiting," he said again, and that was all. The miles passed in uncomfortable silence. I tried to focus on the road, on the familiar rhythm of driving, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Lyle sat motionless, his gaze fixed straight ahead, his hands still folded in his lap. He didn't blink. I realized that after several minutes of watching him out of the corner of my eye, he didn't blink. Not once. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was seeing things because I was tired or stressed or both. But the more I looked, the more certain I became. He wasn't blinking. And there was something else. The temperature in the cab had dropped. Not a little, but significantly. I could see my breath misting in the air in front of me, and I felt a chill creeping into my bones despite the fact that the heater was on full blast. I glanced at the climate control. It was set to 72 degrees, and the indicator showed it was running, but the cold persisted. I reached over and turned the dial up higher, but nothing changed. If anything, it got colder. "You cold?" I asked, more to break the silence than because I expected an answer. He turned his head toward me again, that same slow, mechanical movement. "No," he said. "Are you?" The question hung in the air, and I didn't know how to respond. Was I cold? Yes. But more than that, I was afraid. Not the kind of fear that makes you scream or run, but the kind that settles deep in your gut and makes you want to curl into a ball and hide. I'd felt it before, years ago, when I'd been in a bad accident on an icy road in Montana. The moment right before the truck started to slide, when I knew I was about to lose control and there was nothing I could do to stop it. That same feeling was back now, creeping through me like ice water in my veins. I didn't answer his question. I just kept driving, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The highway stretched on, empty and endless, and the darkness outside seemed to deepen with every mile. I glanced at the dashboard clock. It was 10:47 p.m. I should have been making good time, closing in on the Arizona-California border, but something felt off. The mile markers didn't seem to be passing as quickly as they should. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were moving, but not actually going anywhere, that the road was just repeating itself, looping back on us like some kind of nightmare. I glanced at Lyle again. He was still staring straight ahead, his expression blank, his dark eyes reflecting the glow of the dashboard lights. And then, for just a moment, I thought I saw something else in those eyes. Something moving, writhing, like shadows beneath the surface of dark water. I blinked, and it was gone. But the image stayed with me, burned into my mind, and I knew with absolute certainty that whatever was sitting in my passenger seat, it wasn't human. Not anymore. I wanted to stop the truck. I wanted to pull over, throw open the door, and tell him to get out. But I didn't. I couldn't. because part of me, some deep primal part, knew that if I tried, something very bad would happen. So I kept driving, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps, and I prayed that we'd reach our destination soon, that whatever this was, it would end. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't. This was my last load, my final run, and somehow, I'd picked up something that didn't want to let me go. I kept my eyes locked on the road ahead, trying to ignore the presence beside me. The white lines on the asphalt blurred together in the darkness, and I focused on them like they were the only real thing left in the world. My hands ached from gripping the steering wheel so hard, but I couldn't relax. Every muscle in my body was tense, coiled like a spring, ready to react to something I couldn't name. The cold in the cab had intensified to the point where I could see frost forming on the inside corners of the windshield. That shouldn't have been possible. The heater was still running, still blowing air that should have been warm but felt like it was coming from a meat locker. I reached up and wiped at the condensation on the glass with my sleeve, trying to clear my view, but it just came back within seconds, creeping across the surface like something alive. Lyle Corbett hadn't moved. He sat in the passenger seat like a statue, hands folded, eyes fixed forward. I could feel his presence more than I could see it, like a weight pressing down on the air around me. The silence between us was suffocating, and I knew I had to break it. Had to say something, anything, just to prove to myself that this was still real, that I was still in control. "How far are you going?" I asked, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. He didn't respond immediately. The seconds stretched out, and I began to think he wasn't going to answer at all. Then, slowly, his head turned toward me. That same mechanical movement, like his neck was rotating on gears, his dark eyes fixed on me, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the cab. "To the end," he said. His voice was flat, emotionless, but there was something underneath it, something that made my stomach clench. "The end of what?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. He turned back to the windshield. "Your road," he said simply. "My road. Not the road, not this road, but your road." Like he was talking about something specific, something that belonged to me and me alone. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just drove, my heart hammering in my chest, my mind racing through possibilities that all ended badly. I glanced at the dashboard clock again. It was 11:03 p.m. Only 16 minutes had passed since I'd last checked, but it felt like hours. Time had taken on a strange quality, elastic and unreliable, like I was moving through it at the wrong speed. The highway continued to stretch out in front of me, empty and dark. I hadn't seen another vehicle since I'd picked up Lyle, not a single set of headlights or taillights, no one passing in the opposite direction. That wasn't entirely unusual for this stretch late at night, but it added to the growing sense of wrongness that had settled over everything. I felt isolated in a way I'd never felt before, like the rest of the world had disappeared, and there was nothing left except this truck, this road, and the thing sitting beside me. I tried the CB radio again, flipping through channels, hoping to hear another driver's voice, some proof that I wasn't alone out here. But all I got was static, a low hiss that filled the cab and made my skin crawl. I turned it off and reached for my cell phone, thinking I could call dispatch, tell them I was having some kind of issue, maybe get them to send help. But when I looked at the screen, there was no signal. Not even one bar, just a blank display with the words "no service" glowing mockingly at me. "You won't reach anyone," Lyle said, breaking the silence. I jerked my head toward him, surprised. He hadn't moved, hadn't turned to look at me, but somehow he knew what I was doing. "What?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "You won't reach anyone," he repeated, his tone unchanged. "Not out here." "Why not?" I demanded. "There's always signal on this route. I've made calls from this exact stretch 100 times. He finally turned his head, and when his eyes met mine, I felt something inside me go cold and still. "Because we're not where you think we are," he said. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What the hell does that mean?" I asked, but he just turned back to the windshield and fell silent again. I looked out at the highway, trying to make sense of what he'd said. The road looked the same as it always did. 2 lanes, faded yellow line down the center, cracked asphalt, desert on either side. But now that he'd said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The landscape didn't look quite right. The shadows were too deep, the shapes of the rocks and hills too angular, like they'd been carved by something other than wind and water. And the sky was wrong too. It was too dark, even for a moonless night. There were no stars, no ambient light from distant towns, just an absolute blackness that seemed to press down from above like a weight. I felt panic rising in my chest, clawing its way up my throat, and I had to force myself to breathe slowly, to stay calm. Losing control now would be the worst thing I could do. "Where are we?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lyle didn't answer. I asked again, louder this time. "Where the hell are we?" He turned to me, and for the first time I saw something like emotion flicker across his face. Not sympathy, not kindness, but something closer to curiosity, like he was watching a lab rat navigate a maze. "Somewhere between," he said. "Between what?" I demanded. "Between where you were," he said slowly, "and where you're going." The cryptic answer made my head spin. I wanted to scream at him, to demand a straight answer, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. Whatever Lyle Corbett was, he wasn't going to give me the information I needed. I was on my own, and I had to figure this out myself. I pressed down on the accelerator, pushing the truck faster, hoping that if I just kept moving, I'd eventually break through whatever this was and find myself back on the real I-40, back in the world I knew. The speedometer climbed, 70, 75, 80 miles per hour, faster than I should have been going with a loaded trailer, but I didn't care. I needed to get out of this place, needed to put distance between myself and whatever nightmare I'd driven into. But no matter how fast I went, the landscape didn't change. The road just kept unspooling in front of me, identical mile after identical mile, like I was running on a treadmill that went nowhere. I glanced at the odometer, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't moving. The numbers were frozen, stuck at the same reading they'd been when I picked up Lyle. I was driving, burning fuel. The engine was roaring, but according to the truck, I wasn't going anywhere at all. "Stop the truck," Lyle said suddenly. His voice cut through my thoughts like a knife, and I jerked the wheel slightly, almost veering off the road. "What?" I said, my voice shaking. "Stop the truck," he repeated, his tone calm and measured. "There's something you need to see." "I'm not stopping," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not stopping until I'm out of this place, wherever the hell this is." He turned to look at me, and this time there was no mistaking the expression on his face. It was a warning. "If you don't stop," he said quietly, "you'll drive forever. This road doesn't end. Not for you, not anymore." The words sent a spike of fear through me so intense that I felt lightheaded. I eased off the accelerator, my foot trembling as I moved it to the brake. The truck began to slow, the engine's roar dropping to a low rumble. I didn't want to stop. Every instinct I had screamed at me to keep going, to ignore him, to find a way out on my own. But something in his voice, something in the certainty with which he spoke, told me he was telling the truth. If I kept driving, I'd never escape. I'd be trapped here forever, circling some invisible loop in a place that existed outside the normal world. The truck came to a stop on the shoulder of the road, the air brakes hissing in the silence. I put it in neutral and set the parking brake, then sat there, my hands still on the wheel, staring out into the darkness. "Now what?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Now you get out," Lyle said, "and you look." "Look at what?" I demanded. But he didn't answer. He just opened his door and climbed down from the cab, moving with that same slow, deliberate grace. I watched him through the windshield as he walked around to the front of the truck and stood there, illuminated by the headlights, waiting. I didn't want to get out. I didn't want to leave the relative safety of the cab, even though I knew it was a false safety, that there was no protection here. But I also knew I didn't have a choice. Whatever was happening, whatever this was, I had to face it. I had to see what he wanted me to see. I opened my door and climbed down, my legs shaking so badly I almost lost my footing. The cold hit me immediately, a bone-deep chill that made my teeth chatter. It wasn't just cold, it was wrong, like the temperature itself was infected with something malignant. I walked around to the front of the truck, my boots crunching on gravel that shouldn't have been there. The road had been smooth asphalt just moments ago, but now the shoulder was covered in loose stones that shifted under my weight. Lyle stood a few feet away, his back to me, staring out into the darkness beyond the reach of the headlights. "What am I supposed to be looking at?" I asked, wrapping my arms around myself in a futile attempt to ward off the cold. He lifted one hand and pointed. "There," he said. I followed his gesture, squinting into the darkness. At first, I didn't see anything. Just blackness, thick and impenetrable. But then, slowly, shapes began to emerge. Structures, or what was left of them. Buildings, maybe, or the remnants of buildings, crumbling and skeletal, rising out of the desert like broken teeth. They were far away, too far to make out clearly, but there was something profoundly wrong about them. The angles were off, the proportions distorted, like they'd been designed by someone who didn't quite understand how buildings were supposed to look. And there was movement among them, or at least I thought there was. Shadows shifting and flowing, too large and too fast to be human. I felt my breath catch in my throat. "What is that place?" I whispered. "Nowhere," Lyle said. "And everywhere. It's where things go when they're forgotten, when they're left behind." I tore my gaze away from the ruins and looked at him. "Why are you showing me this?" He turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw his face clearly in the harsh glare of the headlights. His skin was gray and thin, stretched tight over the bones of his skull. His eyes, those dark, lightless eyes, seemed to go on forever, like I was staring into the void itself. His lips pulled back into something that might have been a smile, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too many, crammed into a mouth that shouldn't have been able to hold them. "Because you brought me here," he said. "And now you have to pay the toll." "I don't understand," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't understand any of this." "You will," he said. "Before the end, you will." He stepped closer, and I stumbled backward, my heel catching on a rock. I almost fell, but I caught myself and scrambled back toward the truck. Lyle didn't follow. He just stood there, watching me with those terrible eyes, his head tilted slightly to one side like a predator, sizing up its prey. "Get back in the truck, Gideon," he said, his voice soft but carrying an unmistakable command. "We still have a long way to go." I didn't argue. I turned and ran, throwing myself back into the cab and slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key turned, but finally the engine roared back to life. I released the parking brake and threw the truck into gear, pulling back onto the road with a screech of tires. I didn't look back. I didn't check to see if Lyle was still standing there. I just drove. My foot pressed down on the accelerator, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. But even as I sped away, I knew it was pointless. Because when I glanced in the rearview mirror, there he was. Sitting in the passenger seat, exactly where he'd been before. His hands folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He hadn't climbed back in. He hadn't opened the door. He'd just appeared, like he'd never left. And as I stared at him in the mirror, he slowly turned his head and met my gaze. His lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear over the roar of the engine. But I didn't need to hear them. I knew what he was saying. This is your last load, Gideon, and you're never getting off this road. The highway stretched on, endless and unchanging, and I knew with a sickening certainty that he was right. This wasn't just a bad night. This wasn't just a wrong turn or a moment of confusion. This was something else, something far worse. I'd driven my last mile in the real world. Now I was somewhere else, somewhere in between, and the only companion I had was the thing wearing Lyle Corbett's face. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to do something, anything, to break free of this nightmare. But all I could do was drive. Drive and hope that somewhere up ahead there was still a way out. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I knew there wasn't. This was it. My final run. And it would never end. The minutes bled into hours, or maybe they didn't. Time had lost all meaning. I drove through the darkness, my hands welded to the wheel, my eyes burning from staring at the road. Lyle sat beside me, silent and still, a constant reminder that I was no longer in control of my own fate. Every so often, I'd glance at him, and each time he looked a little less human. His skin grew grayer, more translucent, like I could see through to the bones beneath. His eyes darkened further, if that was even possible, until they were just empty sockets filled with shadow. And his smell, that wet, earthy smell I'd noticed earlier, grew stronger, more pungent, until it filled the cab and made my stomach turn. I tried talking to him again, asking questions, demanding answers, but he never responded. He just sat there, watching, waiting. And slowly I began to understand. This wasn't about him, it was about me. I'd spent 41 years on the road, driving from one place to another, never really stopping, never really settling. I'd told myself it was a job, a career, a way to make a living. But the truth was, I'd been running. Running from what, I didn't know. Maybe from the fear of being tied down, of being ordinary, of having to face the things that scared me. And now, on my last load, the road had finally caught up with me. It wasn't letting me go. It was keeping me, claiming me, making me a part of it forever. And Lyle, or whatever he really was, he was just the toll collector, the one who made sure I paid the price for all those years of running. I don't know how long I drove. Hours, days, maybe longer. The road never changed, and neither did the darkness outside. But eventually, I began to notice something. The cab was changing. The dashboard was fading, the colors draining away until everything was gray and washed out. The seats were crumbling, the upholstery peeling away to reveal rusted metal and rotting foam. The windshield was cracking, spiderwebs of fractures spreading across the glass. My truck, my beautiful Kenworth, was decaying around me, falling apart piece by piece. And I was changing too. I could feel it. My hands on the wheel were thinner, the skin loose and papery. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed a face I barely recognized, gaunt and hollow-eyed, like I'd aged decades in the span of hours. Lyle turned to look at me one last time. His face was almost gone now, just a skull wrapped in a thin layer of gray flesh, but his eyes, those terrible, empty eyes, still held me. "Welcome home, Gideon," he said, his voice a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Welcome to the last load." And then he was gone, not fading, not dissolving, just gone, like he'd never been there at all. But I knew he had been, and I knew I'd never forget him. I kept driving because that's all I could do. That's all I'll ever do. Somewhere out there, on a stretch of highway that doesn't exist on any map, an old Kenworth is still moving through the darkness. And behind the wheel, a man who should have retired years ago just keeps driving, trying to reach a destination he'll never find. That's my story. That's what happened to me on my last load. And if you're a driver, if you spend your nights on the empty highways of America, be careful who you pick up. Because some passengers don't want a ride. They want something else. Something you can't give them. And once they're in your cab, you'll never get them out. I don't know how long I've been driving. The concept of time stopped making sense somewhere back there. Back when the clock on the dashboard froze at 11:47 p.m. and never moved again. It could have been hours, it could have been days, it could have been years. All I know is that I'm still behind the wheel, still moving forward, and the road still stretches out ahead of me like a promise that will never be kept. The darkness outside hasn't changed. It's the same absolute black, thick and suffocating, pressing against the windows like it's trying to get in. Or maybe it's already inside. Maybe it's been inside all along, and I'm just now noticing it. The headlights cut through it, creating a narrow tunnel of visibility. But beyond that, there's nothing. No stars, no moon, no distant lights on the horizon. Just void. The truck is falling apart around me. I can hear it happening, a slow, steady deterioration that's impossible to ignore. The engine still runs, still produces that low, familiar rumble. But it sounds different now, hollow, like it's running on memory rather than fuel. The dashboard lights flicker intermittently, casting strange shadows across the interior of the cab. Some of the gauges have stopped working entirely. The fuel gauge reads empty, but the engine keeps running. The speedometer needle swings wildly between 0 and 100, never settling on any particular number. The odometer is still frozen, still stuck at that same reading it had when I picked up Lyle Corbett. When I picked up the thing that called itself Lyle Corbett. My body is deteriorating too. I can feel it happening with every passing mile. My hands on the steering wheel are skeletal now. The skin stretched so tight over the bones that it looks translucent. I can see the tendons and veins beneath. Dark lines running up my arms and disappearing under the sleeves of my shirt. My shirt, which used to fit me properly, now hangs loose on a frame that's wasted away to almost nothing. When I glance in the rearview mirror, I barely recognize the face looking back at me. It's gaunt, hollow-cheeked, with eyes that have sunken deep into their sockets. My hair, which was mostly gray when this journey started, is now completely white, thin and brittle. I look like a corpse that hasn't figured out it's supposed to be dead yet. Maybe that's exactly what I am. The strangest part is that I'm not hungry. I'm not thirsty. I don't feel tired, even though I haven't slept since this nightmare began. I just exist, trapped in this eternal moment of driving, watching the road unspool in front of me like a ribbon that has no end. Sometimes I try to remember what it was like before. Before I picked up Lyle, before I pulled over on that empty stretch of highway in the Arizona desert. I try to remember my daughter's face, the sound of her voice, the way she used to laugh when I'd come home from a long haul and tell her stories about the road. But the memories are slipping away, becoming hazy and indistinct, like photographs left out in the sun too long. I can feel them fading, being replaced by something else, By this. By the road, by the endless, unchanging darkness. I've tried everything I can think of to escape. I've tried turning around, but when I slow down and attempt to make a U-turn, the steering wheel locks up, refusing to move. I've tried pulling off onto the shoulder and stopping completely, but when I set the parking brake and turn off the engine, nothing happens. The truck just keeps moving forward, as if it's being pulled by some invisible force. I've tried abandoning the truck entirely, opening the door and preparing to jump out, but when I look down, there's nothing beneath the cab. No ground, no road, just that same infinite darkness. So I stay in the driver's seat because it's the only option I have, and I drive. That's all I can do. That's all I'll ever do. The CB radio started working again recently. Or at least I think it's recently. Time is so scrambled now that I can't be sure. But one moment it was dead, producing nothing but static, and the next moment, voices were coming through. Not normal voices. Not the familiar chatter of other truckers. These voices are different. They're distorted, warped, like they're being transmitted through water or from very far away. And they're all saying the same things, variations on the same themes. Some of them are warnings. Turn back while you still can. Don't stop for anyone. The road takes what it's owed. Others are pleas. Help me. I've been driving for so long. I can't find the exit. Please, someone tell me where I am. And still, others are just sounds. Crying, screaming, laughter that goes on and on until it doesn't sound like laughter anymore, just noise. I tried responding once. I picked up the mic and pressed the talk button and said, "This is Gideon Brackett. Can anyone hear me? I need help." The voices stopped immediately. For a long moment there was only silence, and I thought maybe I'd broken through, made some kind of connection with the real world. But then the static came back, louder than before, and underneath it, I heard something else. Breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing, like someone was holding the mic right up to their mouth. And then a voice, clearer than any of the others had been. It was my own voice. "Gideon Brackett," it said, pronouncing each syllable with careful precision. "You're home now. There's no help coming. There never was." I dropped the mic like it had burned me. It clattered to the floor of the cab and rolled somewhere under the seat, and I haven't touched it since. But I can still hear the voices coming through the speaker, a constant murmur of despair and confusion that serves as the soundtrack to my eternal drive. The landscape outside has started to change. Not much, not dramatically, but enough that I notice. The desert is still there, or what passes for desert in this place, but now there are other things too. Structures, rising out of the darkness like monuments to something I don't understand. They're not buildings, not in any conventional sense. They're too tall, too narrow, their shapes all wrong, defying the basic laws of architecture and physics. Some of them twist and spiral upward, reaching toward a sky that doesn't exist. Others branch out in multiple directions, like trees made of metal and stone. And some of them seem to move, shifting and reconfiguring themselves when I'm not looking directly at them. When I glance in the side mirrors, I catch glimpses of them changing, folding in on themselves or stretching out toward the road, their shadows long and grasping. I've started seeing other vehicles too. They appear without warning, emerging from the darkness and running parallel to me for a while before disappearing again. At first, I thought they were real, other truckers who'd somehow ended up in this place, and I felt a surge of hope. But that hope died quickly when I got a better look at them. They're trucks, yes, but they're wrong, just like everything else here. Some of them are too long, stretched out like taffy, their trailers extending back into the darkness until they're impossible to see. Others are too small, compressed and compacted, their cabs crushed down to a fraction of their normal size. And all of them are in various states of decay. Rusted hulks with shattered windshields and blown-out tires, held together by nothing but momentum and whatever force keeps this place running. I can see the drivers sometimes, or what's left of them. They sit behind their wheels, staring straight ahead, their faces blank and expressionless. They look like I must look, like animated corpses going through the motions of driving even though they're not really alive anymore. Once, one of them turned to look at me. We were running side by side for maybe a mile, and I could feel his eyes on me, so I glanced over. He was looking right at me, his face pressed close to the window, his mouth hanging open like he was trying to say something. But no sound came out. He just stared, and then his truck started to drift, moving closer and closer to mine. I jerked the wheel to the right, trying to put distance between us, but he followed, matching my movements exactly. Our vehicles were maybe 6 inches apart, close enough that I could have reached out and touched his truck if I'd rolled down my window. And then, without warning, his truck just collapsed. It folded in on itself like a tin can being crushed, metal screaming and glass shattering, and then it was gone, vanished into the darkness behind me. I checked my mirrors, but there was nothing there. No wreckage, no debris, no sign that anything had ever been there at all. That's when I started to understand something important. This place, wherever it is, it's not stable, it's not permanent. It's held together by belief, by the collective delusion of everyone trapped here. As long as we keep driving, as long as we keep pretending that we're going somewhere, that there's a destination waiting for us at the end of the road, this place continues to exist. But if we stop, if we give up, if we accept that there's nowhere to go, then we collapse. We fold in on ourselves and disappear, and whatever's left of us gets absorbed back into the road, becomes part of the pavement and the darkness and the endless empty miles. That's what happened to that other driver. He'd given up. He'd stopped believing. And the road had taken him. I won't let that happen to me. I can't. So I keep driving, even though every part of me wants to stop, wants to close my eyes and let go and just be done with it. I keep my hands on the wheel and my foot on the accelerator and my eyes on the road, because the moment I stop, I'm finished. The moment I admit that this is hopeless, that there's no way out, I'll end up like that other driver, crushed and consumed and forgotten. I've become a ghost haunting my own truck, an echo of the man I used to be. And all I have left is the act of driving itself. It's the only thing that's real anymore, the only thing I can control. I've started talking to myself, not intentionally, but the silence was becoming unbearable, and the voices on the CB weren't helping. So now I narrate what I'm doing, describing everything I see, maintaining a running commentary on the state of the truck and the road and my own deteriorating condition. It helps, in a way. It reminds me that I still exist, that I'm still capable of thought and speech, even if there's no one to hear me. Passing another structure on the left, I say, my voice hoarse and cracked from disuse. Looks like it's made of bones, or maybe metal, hard to tell in this light. Engine still running, fuel gauge still reads empty. My hands are getting worse. Can barely feel my fingers anymore. But I'm still driving, still moving forward. That's what matters. Sometimes I recite things from memory. Old song lyrics, passages from books I read years ago, multiplication tables. Anything to keep my mind active, to prove to myself that I haven't completely lost it yet. I run through the route I was supposed to take, from Flagstaff to Barstow, naming every town and exit and truck stop along the way. I describe the load I was carrying, auto parts, crates of alternators and starters and brake drums, all secured in the trailer behind me. Though I wonder if the trailer is even still there. I haven't checked in a while. Haven't dared to. I'm afraid of what I might find. Or what might find me. The road itself has started to change too. The surface is rougher now, pitted and cracked, like it hasn't been maintained in decades. In some places, it's barely recognizable as a road at all, just a vague path through the darkness that I follow more by instinct than by sight. The white lines that used to mark the lanes have faded to almost nothing, and in spots they've been replaced by other markings. Symbols I don't recognize, geometric patterns that hurt to look at, words in languages that don't exist. I try not to focus on them. I've learned that looking too closely at anything in this place is a mistake. It invites attention from things I'd rather not meet. And there are things out there. I've seen them, shapes moving in the darkness beyond the reach of my headlights, keeping pace with the truck but never getting close enough for me to see them clearly. Sometimes they're on the ground, loping along on what might be legs. Other times they're in the air, circling overhead like vultures waiting for something to die. I hear them too, when the engine noise dies down for a moment. Strange sounds that don't belong to any animal I know. Clicking and scraping and something that might be laughter or might be crying. I can't tell anymore. All the sounds in this place blend together, forming a discordant symphony that plays on an endless loop. Once, I made the mistake of turning off the headlights. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was curious. Maybe I wanted to see what was really out there, beyond the limited cone of visibility the lights provided. Or maybe I'd just been driving for so long that I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. Whatever the reason, I reached down and flipped the switch, plunging everything into absolute darkness. For a moment there was nothing, just black, total and complete. But then my eyes started to adjust and I saw them. Hundreds of them, thousands. Figures standing alongside the road, stretching back into the distance as far as I could see. They were all facing the highway, all standing perfectly still, watching, waiting. Some of them looked human, or human enough. Others were distinctly not. And as I stared at them, frozen in horror, they started to move. Not toward me, but forward, following the direction of the road, walking in perfect unison like a massive, silent parade. I slammed the headlights back on, and they vanished instantly. But I know they're still there. I can feel them, an audience of the damned, bearing witness to my endless journey. I tried to call out to them once. I rolled down my window, letting in a blast of cold air that felt like needles against my skin. And I shouted into the darkness. "Who are you? What do you want?" My voice sounded small and pathetic, swallowed up by the vast emptiness. For a long moment there was no response, but then, faintly from somewhere far away, I heard an answer. It wasn't words exactly, it was more like an impression, a feeling transmitted directly into my mind. And what it said, or what I understood it to say, was this: "We are you. We are everyone who ever took the wrong road. Everyone who drove too far and couldn't find their way back. We are the price the highway demands, and we are waiting for you to join us." I rolled the window back up and haven't opened it since. Whatever those things are, I want no part of them. I'll stay in this cab, in this decaying shell of a truck, for as long as I can. Because once I step outside, once I acknowledge that there's nowhere else to go, I'll become one of them. Another figure standing by the side of the road, watching the next poor soul drive by on their way to the same fate. That's the truth of this place. It's not hell, not in the traditional sense. It's something worse. It's a trap, a closed loop, a section of highway that exists outside of normal space and time, and anyone who enters it can never leave. We just drive and drive and drive, going nowhere, accomplishing nothing, until we fade away completely and become part of the road itself. But I'm not ready to fade yet. I'm not ready to give up, so I keep driving, because that's all I have left. The road, the truck, the endless night. That's my world now. That's my eternity. And somewhere, deep down, in a part of my mind that's still rational, still capable of understanding what's happened to me, I know the truth. I know that I died back there, back when I picked up Lyle Corbett. Maybe I fell asleep at the wheel and crashed. Maybe I had a heart attack. Maybe something else happened, something I can't remember or don't want to remember. But I died, and this is what comes after. Not heaven. Not hell. Just the road. The same road I spent my whole life on, now extended into infinity. It's fitting, in a way. I always said the road was my life. Now it's my death, too. And I'll be here forever, driving through the darkness, searching for an exit that doesn't exist. That's my story. That's what happened to Gideon Brackett. And if you're ever driving late at night, on some empty stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere, and you see someone standing by the side of the road, waiting for a ride, don't stop. Keep driving. Because some roads don't lead anywhere you want to go. And some passengers will take you places you can never come back from. The dashboard clock finally changed. After what feels like an eternity frozen at 11:47 p.m., the numbers flickered and shifted. But they didn't advance forward. They went backward. 11:46. Then 11:45. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as time began to run in reverse, each minute peeling away like layers of old paint. The implications hit me slowly, like cold water seeping through cracks. If time could move backward here, then maybe nothing was permanent. Maybe everything I'd experienced, everything I'd seen was just one possible outcome of an infinite number of loops. Maybe I'd been driving this same stretch of road over and over, each time believing it was my first time. Each time picking up Lyle Corbett and learning the same terrible truth, only to have it all reset and begin again. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a strange sort of calm wash over me. If this was a loop, if I was destined to repeat this journey forever, then at least there was a pattern to it, a structure. And patterns could be understood. Structures could be navigated. I started paying closer attention to everything around me, looking for signs, for markers that might help me understand the rules of this place. The symbols on the road became my focus. I'd been avoiding them before, afraid of what they might do if I looked too closely, but now I studied them, committing their shapes to memory. Some of them repeated at regular intervals. A circle with 3 lines radiating from it appeared every few miles. A spiral that seemed to rotate as I passed by it. A symbol that looked like 2 hands clasped together, or maybe 2 hands trying to pull apart. I didn't know what they meant, but I recorded them in my mind, cataloging them like a cartographer mapping unknown territory. The other trucks appeared more frequently now. They emerged from the darkness with increasing regularity, sometimes several at once, forming a phantom convoy that traveled alongside me. I started to recognize some of them. A faded red Peterbilt with a cracked windshield that always appeared on my left. A white Freightliner with no trailer, just the cab, that ran ahead of me for miles before vanishing. And a green Mack with rust eating through its doors that always stayed in my mirrors, following at a fixed distance. The drivers inside were always the same, too. The same hollow faces, the same empty stares. But I realized something important. They weren't trying to hurt me. They weren't threats. They were just there, existing in the same trap I was in, going through the same motions I was. They were my companions in this eternal purgatory, even if we couldn't communicate, even if we were each locked in our own private hell. I tried honking my horn once, a long, sustained blast that echoed across the empty highway. The other trucks didn't react. But something else did. The figures by the side of the road, the ones I'd seen when I turned off my headlights, they all turned to face me at once. I felt their attention like a physical weight, pressing down on the truck, on me. The air in the cab grew thick and hard to breathe. my vision blurred. And then, mercifully, they turned away again, resuming their vigil. I didn't honk the horn after that. I'd learned my lesson. In this place, it was better to stay quiet, to not draw attention. The road had rules, and breaking them had consequences. My hands were barely hands anymore. The flesh had continued to deteriorate, leaving behind something that looked more like dried leather stretched over bone. But they still functioned. I could still grip the wheel, still feel the vibration of the engine through the steering column. My sense of touch was the last thing that remained relatively intact, even as everything else fell away. I clung to it, using it as proof that I still existed, that I was still real. When the numbness threatened to spread, I'd press my palm against the rough fabric of the seat, feeling the texture, the friction, the simple physical reality of it. It helped, not much, but enough. The CB radio continued its endless stream of voices. I'd stopped trying to make sense of them, stopped trying to differentiate one from another. They'd become like white noise, a constant background hum that I'd learned to tune out. But occasionally something would break through, a phrase or a word that caught my attention. One voice, crackling and distant, said something that made me freeze. "Dispatcher's looking for you, Gideon. Says you're overdue." Dispatcher. The word hit me like a hammer. Mina Dorsey. That was her name. My dispatcher, the woman who'd been assigning my routes for the past 5 years. I could almost see her face, round and friendly, always smiling even when she was dealing with impossible logistics. She had a coffee mug shaped like a dog that she drank from every morning. She had a son in college studying engineering. She existed in the real world, the world I'd left behind, and she was looking for me. I grabbed for the CB mic, forgetting that I'd dropped it earlier. My hands scrabbled across the floor of the cab, searching desperately. I found it wedged under the seat, the cord tangled around itself. I yanked it free and pressed the talk button. "Mina," I said, my voice cracking. "Mina, if you can hear me, I'm here. I'm still here. I don't know where here is, but I'm here." Static answered me. Just static. I tried again. "Mina Dorsey, Silverton Transport. This is Unit 47, Gideon Brackett. I need help. I need someone to find me." More static. And then, underneath it, barely audible, a voice. Not Mina's voice. A man's voice, Lyle's voice. "She can't hear you, Gideon. No one can. You're too far gone now." I hurled the mic across the cab. It hit the passenger side window and bounced off, landing somewhere in the darkness. I didn't care. I didn't want to hear his voice again. Didn't want to be reminded that he was still here, still watching, still waiting. I'd convinced myself that he was gone, that he'd served his purpose and moved on to torment someone else. But he wasn't gone. He'd never been gone. He was part of this place, woven into its fabric, and as long as I was here, he would be too. The passenger seat beside me remained empty, but I could feel his presence. That cold spot in the air, that sensation of being watched. He was there, invisible but undeniable. "What do you want from me?" I asked aloud, not expecting an answer. But I got one anyway. The voice didn't come from the CB this time. It came from inside my own head, soft and intimate, like someone whispering directly into my ear. "I want what everyone wants, Gideon. I want to go home, but I can't. Neither can you. So we drive. That's all we do. We drive until there's nothing left of us but the driving itself." "Why?" I asked. "Why us? Why this?" "Because you chose the road," the voice said. "Every day, every trip, every time you climbed into this cab and drove away from everything else in your life, you made a choice, and choices have consequences. This is yours." The words settled over me like a shroud. He was right, in a way I didn't want to acknowledge. I'd always told myself I was driving for practical reasons, to make a living, to support my family, to have a purpose. But the truth was simpler and darker. I'd been running, from responsibility, from intimacy, from the messy, complicated business of being present in my own life. The road had been my escape, my excuse, my shield against everything I was afraid of, and now it had become my prison. The very thing I'd used to avoid facing myself had turned into the thing I could never escape. There was a cruel symmetry to it that I almost appreciated. The structures outside were getting closer to the road now, crowding in on both sides. Some of them were tall enough that I had to crane my neck to see their tops. Others were low and squat, hunched against the ground like sleeping animals. And they were definitely moving now, not just when I looked away, but constantly, shifting and reconfiguring, growing and shrinking. I watched one of them split down the middle and separate into two distinct forms, each one drifting away from the other until they were lost in the darkness. I watched another one collapse inward, imploding silently until nothing remained. The landscape was alive in a way that defied explanation, responding to something I couldn't perceive, following rules I didn't understand. A new sound joined the cacophony. Music. Faint at first, but growing louder. It was coming from the truck's radio, even though I hadn't turned it on. The song was familiar, something I'd heard 1,000 times in my previous life. A country ballad about lost love and long roads and the price of freedom. I used to like that song. Now it sounded like a dirge. The singer's voice was distorted, stretched out and slowed down, turning the lyrics into something mournful and strange. I reached for the volume knob to turn it off, but my hand passed through it. The knob wasn't solid anymore. None of the controls were. They were becoming translucent, fading like ghosts. The truck was disappearing, not all at once, but piece by piece, component by component. Soon there would be nothing left but me and the road. I wondered what would happen when the truck was completely gone. Would I keep driving? My hands gripping a wheel that no longer existed. My feet working pedals made of air. Or would I finally be released, allowed to stop, to rest, to become one of those figures standing by the roadside? Part of me hoped for the latter. I was so tired. Tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion, down to something fundamental and irreparable. I wanted to stop, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't let me. My hands stayed on the wheel. My foot stayed on the accelerator. I was a machine now, programmed for one purpose, and that program would continue running until there was nothing left to run it. The clock had continued its backward march. It was 11:15 now, then 11, then 10:45. I watched the numbers fall, wondering if they would reach zero or if they would just keep going, counting down into negative numbers, into time that had never existed. When the clock hit 10:30, something changed. The darkness outside began to lighten, just slightly. Not enough to see clearly, but enough to perceive shapes, outlines, suggestions of form. And in that dim illumination, I saw them. The other drivers. Not in their trucks this time, but standing alongside the road, joining the figures I'd seen before. They'd given up, stopped driving, accepted their fate, and now they were part of the audience, watching me continue my futile journey. I recognized some of their faces. The driver from the red Peterbilt, the woman from the white Freightliner. Others I didn't know, couldn't have known, but who looked hauntingly familiar anyway. They all wore the same expression. Not sadness, not anger, just acceptance. They'd made their peace with this place, and now they were waiting for me to do the same. "Not yet," I said to them, though I don't know if they could hear me. I'm not ready yet. But even as I said it, I felt the lie in it. I was ready. I'd been ready for a long time. I just couldn't admit it. The road ahead began to split. Not literally, but I could see two versions of it superimposed on top of each other. One continued straight, unchanging, eternal. The other curved away, leading somewhere I couldn't see. A choice. The first real choice I'd been given since this nightmare began. I didn't know what the second road led to. Maybe it was an exit. Maybe it was another trap. Maybe it didn't matter. I eased the truck toward the curve, feeling the steering wheel turn in my hands. The figures alongside the road watched silently as I made my decision. And as I committed to the turn, something broke inside me. Not painfully, but like a string that had been pulled too tight finally snapping. A release. The curved road led downward, descending into deeper darkness. The truck picked up speed, gravity pulling us forward, and I let it happen. I stopped fighting, stopped trying to control anything. I just held on and let the road take me wherever it wanted to go. The structures outside blurred into streaks of light and shadow. The other trucks disappeared. Even the figures faded away. It was just me and the road now, moving faster and faster, plunging into an abyss that had no bottom. And then, suddenly, everything stopped. The truck was parked, engine off. I was sitting in the cab, my hands still on the wheel. But everything was quiet. Completely quiet. No engine noise, no wind, no voices. I looked around. I was in a truck stop, an actual truck stop with lights and other vehicles and a building with windows that glowed yellow in the night. But something was wrong. Everything was too still. The other trucks weren't running. The people I could see through the windows of the building weren't moving. They were frozen in place, like statues or photographs. I tried to open my door, but it wouldn't budge. I tried the window, but it wouldn't roll down. I was trapped in the cab, looking out at a world that looked real but wasn't. A diorama, a stage set, another layer of the trap. "You almost made it," Lyle's voice said. He was sitting in the passenger seat again. When he'd appeared, I didn't know, but he was there, looking exactly as he had when I'd first picked him up. Dark coat, wide-brimmed hat, those terrible empty eyes. "Almost where?" I asked, too exhausted to be afraid anymore. "Out," he said. "There's a door here for people like us. People who've driven so long they don't know how to stop. It's hidden, but it's here. You just have to be willing to walk through it." "What's on the other side?" I asked. He shrugged. "I don't know. I've never been brave enough to find out. Maybe nothing. Maybe something worse than this, or maybe something better. The only way to know is to try." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "You've been tormenting me this whole time. Why help me now?" For the first time since I'd met him, something like emotion crossed his face. Regret, maybe, or pity. "Because I'm tired too, Gideon. Tired of being the warning, the messenger, the toll collector. I want to stop as much as you do, but I can't do it alone. I need someone to open the door with me, someone who understands what it means to let go." He extended his hand toward me, not a threatening gesture, but an offering, an invitation. "Come with me," he said. "Let's find out what's on the other side together." I looked at his hand, at his face, at the frozen world outside the windows, and I realized I had one last choice to make. I could stay here in this static moment, trapped but safe, existing in a space between the road and whatever came next. Or I could take his hand and step into the unknown, risking everything for the possibility of release. There was no right answer, no guarantee, just faith, or the absence of it. I thought about my daughter, my life, the 41 years I'd spent behind the wheel, All the miles, all the loads, all the time I'd spent running from myself. And I thought about what I wanted, really wanted. If I stripped away all the fear and doubt and self-deception, I wanted to stop. I wanted to rest. I wanted to be done. I reached out and took Lyle's hand. His skin was cold as I'd expected, but solid. Real. He helped me out of the seat, and together we moved toward the driver's side door. When he touched it, it swung open, and cold air rushed in, carrying with it the smell of desert and diesel and something else, something I couldn't identify. We climbed down from the cab together, our feet hitting the pavement at the same moment. The truck stop was still frozen, but I could see it now, really see it. It was old, decades old, maybe abandoned for years. The paint was peeling, the windows were broken. The other trucks were rusted hulks, long past any hope of running. This place had been dead for a long time. We'd just been too trapped to notice. Lyle led me toward the building. As we got closer, I saw the door he'd mentioned. It was small, barely noticeable, tucked into a shadowed alcove beside the main entrance. It looked like a maintenance door, something a janitor might use, but there was something about it that felt significant, heavy with meaning. "This is it?" I asked. "This is it," he confirmed. "Once we go through, there's no coming back. Whatever's on the other side, that's where we'll be. Forever, or until forever ends. And you don't know what's there." He shook his head. "No one does. That's why most people don't take the chance. They'd rather stay here where at least they know what to expect." I looked back at my truck, at the Kenworth that had been my home, my office, my refuge for so many years. It looked small now, insignificant, just another piece of junk in a forgotten lot. I'd given it so much importance, invested so much of my identity in it, and in the end it was just metal and plastic and rubber. It didn't define me. It never had. I'd defined myself, and I'd chosen poorly. But maybe I could choose differently now. "Okay," I said, "let's go." Lyle reached for the door handle, but before he could turn it, I stopped him. "Wait," I said. "One question. Are you real? Is any of this real?" He smiled, and for the first time it looked genuine. "Does it matter?" he asked. "Real, not real, dream, memory, nightmare, purgatory, it's all the same when you're living it. We're here. That's the only truth that counts." I nodded. He was right. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the choice I was making right now. He turned the handle, and the door swung open. On the other side was light. Not harsh, not blinding, just gentle, warm light that felt like sunrise. I couldn't see what lay beyond it. Couldn't make out any details, but I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe. "Together," Lyle said. "Together," I agreed, and we stepped through. There's no way to describe what happened next. Language doesn't have words for it. But I felt the road fall away, felt the weight of all those miles lift off my shoulders, felt the endless driving finally, mercifully, come to an end. Was it release? Was it oblivion? Was it something else entirely? I don't know. I'll never know. And that's okay, because whatever it was mine. My choice, my ending. And after 41 years of running, that's all I ever really wanted. If you're a driver reading this, if you spend your nights on America's highways hauling loads from one place to another, remember this story. Remember Gideon Brackett, who drove one last load and never came back. Remember that the road takes payment from everyone who travels it, sometimes in small ways, sometimes in ways that last forever. Be careful who you pick up. Be careful which exits you take. And most importantly, know when to stop. Know when to turn off the engine, get out of the cab, and walk away. Because if you don't, if you keep driving until driving is all you are, the road will claim you. And you'll become another ghost story, another warning that no one heeds. Another driver who disappeared on their last load, leaving behind nothing but an empty truck and questions no one can answer. I'm done driving now. For better or worse, my road has ended, and wherever I am, whatever I've become, at least I'm not behind that wheel anymore. At least I'm not watching those white lines blur into infinity. At least I've stopped. That has to count for something. It has to. Because if it doesn't, if this was all for nothing, then I don't know what any of it meant. And I need it to have meant something. Even if that something is just this. I was here, I drove, and I chose to stop. That's my story, that's all I have, and now I'm passing it on to you, hoping you'll make better choices than I did, hoping you'll know when to let go. Because the road doesn't care about hope or intentions or second chances. The road only cares about one thing, whether you're moving or standing still. And once you stop moving, once you finally come to rest, the road moves on without you. And that's exactly as it should be. My name is Orson Weller, and I've been driving for Midwest Continental Freight for the past 19 years. That's a long time to work for any company, especially in an industry where drivers jump from one outfit to another, chasing better pay or better routes. But I stayed with Midwest because they treated me fair, paid on time, and didn't ask questions when I needed time off. It was a good arrangement, the kind that doesn't come around often in this business. Or at least it was good until about 6 months ago, when the rumors started. Word came down through the grapevine that the company was in trouble, financial trouble, the kind that ends with bankruptcy filings and liquidation sales. Trucks getting repossessed in the middle of the night, loads abandoned at distribution centers because there was no money to pay for fuel. I didn't believe it at first. Midwest had been around for 40 years, survived recessions and fuel crises and everything else the road could throw at it. But then the signs became impossible to ignore. The first thing I noticed was the maintenance, or the lack of it. My truck, a 2017 Freightliner Cascadia, started developing problems that would have been fixed immediately a year ago. A grinding noise in the transmission that the shop kept saying they'd look at next week. A persistent oil leak that left dark stains on the pavement wherever I parked. Tires that were worn past the safety markers but that no one seemed in a hurry to replace. I reported everything through the proper channels, filled out the maintenance requests, followed procedure. But nothing got done. The shop was always backed up, always waiting on parts, always dealing with more urgent problems. I started doing my own repairs when I could. The minor stuff, checking fluid levels obsessively, carrying extra supplies in the cab. But there's only so much you can do with duct tape and prayer. Then the routes started changing. Midwest had always run regular lanes, predictable paths between the same cities, the same warehouses, the same customers. You could set your watch by them, but suddenly loads were getting rerouted at the last minute, destinations changing while trucks were already on the road, pickups delayed or canceled entirely. Drivers were spending hours sitting in parking lots waiting for instructions that never came, burning fuel and time while dispatch tried to figure out what was supposed to happen next. The whole operation felt like it was held together with spit and hope, and the hope was running out fast. I started hearing stories from other drivers, guys I'd worked with for years, about paychecks bouncing, about insurance coverage lapsing, about loads that disappeared somewhere between pickup and delivery with no explanation. It was chaos, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time before the whole thing collapsed. 3 weeks ago, the official announcement came down. Midwest Continental Freight was ceasing operations. All assets would be sold to cover debts, and all employees would be terminated effective immediately. Well, not quite immediately. They needed drivers to finish delivering the loads that were already in transit, the ones that customers had paid for and were expecting. So they made a deal with those of us who were still on the road. One last run, deliver what you're hauling, bring the truck back to the terminal, and you'd get paid for that final load plus a small severance package. Not much, but better than nothing. Most of the guys took it. What choice did we have? You can't just abandon a loaded trailer on the side of the highway and walk away. There are laws, contracts, responsibilities. So we agreed. One last load, then we'd all go our separate ways and figure out what came next. I was in Kansas City when I got the call from my supervisor, Dean Holler. Dean had been with the company even longer than I had, worked his way up from driver to dispatcher to terminal manager over the course of 25 years. He was a good man, or at least he'd always seemed like one. The kind of boss who remembered your birthday and asked about your family. But that day, when he called me, his voice sounded different. Strained, tired, like he'd been up for 3 days straight and was running on nothing but coffee and stress. He told me about the company shutting down, which I'd already heard through the driver network, and then he told me about the final load arrangement. "You're hauling electronics right now, aren't you?" he asked. "Computer components, monitors, that sort of thing?" I confirmed that I was. I'd picked up the load in Denver 2 days earlier, bound for a distribution center outside of St. Louis. Standard run, nothing unusual about it. "Change of plans," Dean said. "Customer in St. Louis canceled. Went with a different carrier trying to avoid the bankruptcy mess. So, we're rerouting you." "Rerouting where?" I asked. There was a pause, long enough that I thought maybe the connection had dropped. Then Dean came back. "Little town in Missouri called Pershing, about 2 hours south of where you are now. Customer there will take the load, pay cash on delivery. It's all arranged." I pulled out my atlas, the old-fashioned paper kind that I still kept in the cab even though everyone used GPS now. I flipped to the Missouri page and scanned for Pershing. It took me a minute to find it. The town was tiny, barely a dot on the map, located in the south-central part of the state, far from any major highways. The kind of place you'd never end up unless you were specifically going there. "I don't see any distribution centers listed for Pershing," I said. "No warehouses, no freight terminals. What kind of customer are we talking about?" "Private buyer," Dean said. "Look, Orson, I know this is unusual, but these are unusual circumstances. The company needs every dollar it can get right now to settle debts and pay out the severance packages. This buyer is paying full price, cash, no questions asked. All you have to do is deliver the load to the address I'm going to send you, get a signature, and head back to the terminal. That's it, last run, then you're done." Something about the way he said it made my skin prickle. No questions asked. That phrase, in my experience, usually meant something questionable was happening. But I was tired, and I wanted this to be over, and I needed that final paycheck. So I agreed. "Send me the address," I said. "I'll head that way now." "Thanks, Orson," Dean said, and there was real relief in his voice. "I knew I could count on you. Drive safe." The line went dead before I could respond. The address came through on my phone a few minutes later, along with the name and phone number for the contact at the delivery location. The name was just initials CR, which struck me as odd, but not odd enough to make a fuss about. The phone number had a Missouri area code. The address itself was a rural route number, no street name, no building name, just RR4, Box 127, Pershing, Missouri. I plugged it into my GPS, and after a moment of processing, a route appeared. 2 hours and 17 minutes, most of it on state highways and county roads. I'd be driving through the heart of the Ozarks, that hilly, heavily forested region that tourists love and truckers generally avoid because of the narrow roads and steep grades. But it was only 2 hours. I'd driven worse. I finished my coffee, did a quick walk-around inspection of the truck and trailer, and pulled out of the rest area where I'd been parked. The GPS guided me south, off the interstate and onto a 2-lane state highway that cut through farmland and small towns with names I'd never heard before. The drive started out normal enough. The weather was clear, the road was dry, and traffic was light. I passed through a few towns, the usual collection of gas stations and dollar stores and churches that make up rural America. People going about their lives, oblivious to the fact that my world was ending, that my career was coming to an abrupt halt. I tried not to think about what I'd do next, where I'd find work, whether anyone would hire a 43-year-old driver whose last employer had gone bankrupt. Those were problems for later. Right now, I just needed to focus on the road, on delivering this load, on finishing what I'd started. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields. I'd be arriving in Pershing right around dusk, which wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. About an hour into the drive, I started noticing that the GPS was taking me on increasingly obscure roads. We'd left the state highway and were now on county roads, then township roads, each one narrower and more poorly maintained than the last. Potholes appeared with increasing frequency, and the shoulders were non-existent, just steep drops into drainage ditches on either side. I had to slow down significantly to navigate safely, which meant my arrival time kept getting pushed back. The landscape had changed too. The open farmland had given way to dense forest, thick stands of oak and pine that crowded close to the road, blocking out much of the remaining daylight. It felt like driving through a tunnel, claustrophobic and isolating. I hadn't seen another vehicle in at least 20 minutes, which wasn't surprising given how remote this area was, but it added to the growing sense of unease I was feeling. I tried calling the contact number Dean had sent me, thinking maybe I could get better directions or at least confirm that someone would be there when I arrived. The phone rang 6 times, then went to a generic voicemail. No name, no greeting, just a beep. I left a message saying I was about an hour out and asking for a call back, but I didn't expect one. The whole situation was starting to feel wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. It wasn't just the remote location or the last-minute route change. It was something deeper, more instinctive. That little voice in the back of your head that evolution gave you to warn you about danger. That voice was speaking up now, telling me to turn around, to go back, to refuse this delivery and deal with the consequences. But I didn't listen. I kept driving, telling myself I was being paranoid, that this was just a normal, if slightly unusual, delivery to a rural customer. People in small towns ordered things too. There was no reason to assume anything sinister was happening. The GPS announced that I was 15 minutes from my destination. The road had deteriorated even further, now barely more than a gravel track winding through the forest. Tree branches scraped against the sides of the trailer as I navigated the tight curves, and I winced every time I heard the sound of metal on wood. This was going to leave marks, maybe even damage the cargo, but there was no other way forward. The road was too narrow to turn around, and backing up for miles wasn't an option. I was committed now, whether I liked it or not. The sky visible through the canopy of trees was turning deep purple, that brief twilight period between day and night when everything takes on an uncertain quality. I turned on my headlights and they illuminated the road ahead in harsh white beams that made the shadows seem even darker by contrast. Then I saw the mechanic. He was standing on the side of the road next to a pickup truck with its hood up, looking at the engine with a flashlight. As I approached, he turned and waved, not urgently, but with the casual gesture of someone flagging down help. I slowed the truck, debating whether to stop. Every trucker knows you don't pick up strangers. Don't stop for people you don't know, especially not in isolated areas like this. But this wasn't a stranger hitchhiking. This was someone with vehicle trouble, and the driver's code said you helped when you could. I pulled the truck to a stop about 20 feet past him and set the parking brake. Through my side mirror, I watched him approach. He was maybe in his late 50s, wearing greasy coveralls and a baseball cap with a logo I didn't recognize. His face was weathered and lined, the face of someone who'd spent a lifetime working outdoors. He didn't look threatening, just tired and frustrated. I rolled down my window as he came alongside the cab. "Engine trouble?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He nodded. "Radiator's shot. Overheated about a mile back. Barely made it this far before she quit on me completely. You wouldn't happen to have any water, would you? Just enough to get me to the next town?" I did have water, a couple of gallon jugs that I kept in the cab for emergencies. I grabbed one and handed it down to him. "Keep it," I said. "I've got more." He took the jug with a grateful nod. "Appreciate it. Name's Ferris Quaid, by the way. I run a shop over in Bixby, about 15 miles east of here." "Orson Weller," I said. "You're a long way from any shop." "Was making a house call," Ferris said. "Customer out this way needed a generator looked at. Should have known better than to take the old truck, but the good one's in pieces back at the shop." He glanced at my rig, taking in the Midwest Continental Freight logo on the door. "You're pretty far off the beaten path yourself. Delivering something local?" "Trying to," I said. "GPS has me going to an address in Pershing, but I'm starting to think it doesn't actually exist." Ferris's expression changed. It was subtle, just a slight tightening around the eyes, but I noticed it. "Pershing," he repeated. "You sure that's where you're headed?" "That's what the paperwork says. RR4, Box 127. You know it?" He was quiet for a moment, and in that silence I felt the unease I'd been pushing down all afternoon surge back up. "I know it," Ferris said finally. "And if I were you, I'd turn around and find somewhere else to deliver that load." "Why?" I asked. "What's wrong with it?" He looked up at me, and in the fading light his face seemed older, more worn. "Nothing's wrong with the place itself," he said. "It's what they do there, what they've always done." "And what's that?" I pressed. He shook his head. "I've said too much already. Just take my advice and go back the way you came. Tell your dispatcher you couldn't find the address. Tell them the road was too narrow. Tell them whatever you want. But don't go to that place. Not if you want to leave again." Before I could ask what he meant, before I could demand a real explanation, he turned and walked back to his truck, carrying the water jug. I watched him pour it into the radiator, then close the hood and climb into the cab. His engine turned over once, twice, then caught, rumbling to life. He pulled back onto the road and drove past me without looking up, heading in the direction I'd come from, leaving me alone on that darkening forest road with more questions than answers and a delivery to make that I was increasingly certain I shouldn't. I sat there for several minutes after Ferris Quaid drove away, the engine idling, my hands resting on the steering wheel. His warning echoed in my head, mixing with the unease I'd been feeling all afternoon. Don't go to that place. Not if you want to leave again. What the hell did that mean? Was it some kind of local superstition, a story people told to scare outsiders? Or was there something genuinely dangerous about this delivery location, something Ferris knew from experience? I considered turning around. I seriously considered it. But the practical side of my brain, the part that had kept me employed and functional for 19 years, spoke up with cold logic. I needed this final paycheck, I needed the severance package, small as it was, and I'd come too far to turn back now. The road behind me was barely wide enough for the truck as it was. Attempting a turnaround would be risky at best, impossible at worst. The only way out was forward, through whatever waited at the end of this road. I released the parking brake and shifted back into gear. The truck lurched forward, tires crunching on gravel, and I continued deeper into the forest. The GPS showed I was now less than 10 minutes from the destination, though the narrow, winding road made progress slow. The trees pressed in close on both sides, their branches forming a canopy overhead that blocked out what little remained of the daylight. My headlights carved tunnels through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead in brief, stuttering glimpses. I caught flashes of things at the edges of the light. Rusted mailboxes tilted at odd angles, collapsed fences draped with vines, the remnants of structures that might have been houses or barns once, now reduced to skeletal frames slowly being reclaimed by the forest. This wasn't just remote. This was abandoned, a place people had left and never come back to. The GPS announced I was arriving at my destination. I slowed the truck to a crawl, scanning both sides of the road for any sign of a driveway or entrance. At first, I didn't see anything, just more trees and darkness. But then my headlights caught a break in the forest on the right side, a gap between the trunks where the vegetation had been cleared away. It wasn't much of a driveway, just two parallel ruts in the dirt barely wide enough for a vehicle, but it matched the description of what I was looking for. A wooden post stood at the entrance, and nailed to it was a metal sign so rusted and weathered I could barely make out the numbers. RR4, Box 127. This was it. I turned the wheel and guided the truck off the main road and onto the driveway, feeling the suspension bounce and groan as the tires found every rut and pothole. The trees closed in around me, branches scraping the sides of the trailer with sounds that set my teeth on edge. The driveway stretched on much longer than I'd anticipated, winding through the forest for what must have been a quarter mile. I kept expecting to emerge into a clearing, to see a house or warehouse or some kind of structure. But the trees just kept coming, endless and suffocating. Then, finally, the forest opened up, and I found myself in a large, roughly circular clearing. In the center stood a building. I say building, but that word doesn't really capture what I was looking at. It was massive, easily the size of a warehouse, but it didn't look like any warehouse I'd ever delivered to. The structure was old, constructed from dark wood that had weathered to an almost black color. The roof was steeply pitched, covered in moss and what looked like decades of accumulated debris. There were windows, but they were small and irregularly placed, giving the whole structure an unsettling, asymmetrical appearance. No signs, no company logos, no indication of what purpose the building served. Just this hulking presence sitting in the middle of the clearing like it had grown there naturally. I brought the truck to a stop about 50 feet from the building, leaving the engine running and the headlights on. The beams illuminated the front of the structure, and I could see now that there was a large loading dock, the kind you'd back a trailer up to for unloading. That was something, at least. It meant this place was set up to receive freight, even if everything else about it screamed wrong. I grabbed my flashlight from the cab and climbed down, my boots hitting the packed dirt with a soft thud. The air here felt different, heavier, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. It carried a smell I couldn't quite place, something organic and slightly sweet, like decomposing vegetation mixed with something else, something chemical. I walked towards the building slowly, the beam of my flashlight sweeping across the front of the structure. Up close, I could see that the wood was marked with symbols. They'd been carved or burned into the surface, geometric patterns and characters that didn't belong to any alphabet I recognized. They covered the walls in dense clusters, overlapping and intertwining, creating a visual noise that was difficult to look at for long. The loading dock had a steel roll-up door, the kind you'd find on any commercial warehouse, but this one looked ancient, the metal corroded and streaked with rust. Next to it was a regular door, human-sized, also steel. I approached the smaller door and knocked, the sound echoing dully in the still air. No response. I knocked again, harder this time, and called out, "Delivery for CR. Anyone here?" Silence. I tried the handle. Locked. I stepped back and looked up at the windows. They were dark. Not a hint of light anywhere. The whole place looked abandoned, like no one had been here in years, but that didn't make sense. Dean had said this was all arranged, that the buyer was expecting me, that payment would be made on delivery. Someone had to be here. I walked along the front of the building, looking for another entrance or any sign of activity. That's when I noticed the vehicles. They were parked around the far side of the building, hidden from view when I'd first pulled in. 4 of them, all trucks, all commercial rigs like mine. But they were old, much older than they should have been. A Peterbilt that looked like it was from the 70s. A Kenworth from the 80s. 2 Freightliners that might have been from the 90s. All of them were in various states of disrepair. Tires flat or missing entirely. Windows cracked or broken. Paint faded to the point where company logos were barely visible. And they were covered in vegetation, vines and moss creeping up from the ground, wrapping around axles and climbing over hoods, like the forest was slowly consuming them. I felt my heart rate pick up, a cold sensation spreading through my chest. These trucks had been here for a long time, years, maybe decades, and no one had moved them, no one had towed them away, no one had done anything with them. They'd just been left here to rot. I thought about Ferris Quade's warning. Not if you want to leave again. Was this what he meant? Were these the vehicles of other drivers who'd made deliveries to this place and never left? I backed away from the abandoned trucks, my mind racing. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. I needed to leave, needed to get back in my truck and drive away from this place as fast as I could. The delivery, the payment, the severance package. None of it mattered if I ended up like those other drivers, stranded in the middle of nowhere with a dead truck and no way out. I turned to head back to my rig, and that's when I saw the man. He was standing between me and my truck, motionless, watching me. I hadn't heard him approach, hadn't seen any lights or heard any doors open. He'd just appeared, as if he'd materialized out of the darkness. He was tall and thin, dressed in dark clothing that blended with the shadows. His face was pale, almost luminous in the dim light from my truck's headlights, and his eyes, even from this distance, seemed to reflect the light like an animal's. "Mr. Weller," he said, his voice soft, but carrying clearly across the clearing. "We've been expecting you." The fact that he knew my name, a name I hadn't given to anyone here, sent a fresh wave of fear through me. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you CR?" He didn't answer the question. Instead, he gestured toward the building. "You have a delivery to make. The loading dock is this way. If you'll back your trailer up, we can begin unloading immediately." "I need to see some identification first," I said, falling back on procedure because it was all I had. "I need confirmation that you're authorized to receive this shipment, and I need to arrange payment." He tilted his head slightly as if my words amused him. "Payment has already been arranged, Mr. Weller. Everything has been arranged. All that remains is for you to fulfill your part of the agreement." "What agreement?" I demanded. "I don't have an agreement with you. I have a work order from my company to deliver a load to an address. That's it. Now, if you can't provide proper identification and documentation, I can't release this cargo." The man took a step toward me, and something about the way he moved made my skin crawl. It wasn't quite right. The gait slightly off, like he was mimicking human movement without fully understanding it. "Your company no longer exists, Mr. Weller," he said. "Midwest Continental Freight ceased operations this morning. The terminal was closed, the assets seized, the remaining employees dismissed. There is no company for you to return to. There is only this delivery, this final obligation." He was right, and the knowledge of it hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd known the company was shutting down, but I hadn't realized it would happen so quickly. I'd thought I'd have time to finish this delivery, get back to the terminal, collect my money. But if what he was saying was true, if the company was already gone, then what was I doing here? Who was paying for this delivery? Who had arranged it? "Dean Haller sent me here," I said. "My supervisor. He said you'd pay cash on delivery." The man smiled, and it was the most unsettling expression I'd ever seen. Too wide, too knowing. Mr. Haller fulfilled his obligations admirably. He provided what was promised. Now you must do the same. "What obligations?" I asked, but I was starting to understand, starting to piece together what was happening. "What did Dean promise you?" "Drivers," the man said simply. "We require drivers for our operation. Experienced drivers who know the roads, who understand the work. Mr. Haller has been providing them to us for quite some time, sending them here under various pretenses. Final deliveries, route changes, special assignments. They come and they stay and they work. And in exchange, Mr. Haller received compensation that allowed him to maintain certain aspects of his lifestyle that his legitimate salary could not support." I felt sick. Dean had been selling out drivers to this place, whatever this place was, for money. How many others had he sent here over the years? How many drivers had made that final delivery and never come back? "I'm not staying here," I said, my voice shaking with anger and fear. "I'm getting in my truck, and I'm leaving, and you can't stop me." "Can't I?" the man asked, and he gestured toward my truck. I turned to look, and my blood ran cold. The Freightliner was different. The paint was faded, the chrome dulled, the tires showing signs of wear that hadn't been there minutes ago. It was aging, deteriorating before my eyes, joining the other abandoned vehicles in their slow decay. "What are you doing?" I shouted, running toward the truck. But the man was faster, impossibly fast, suddenly standing in front of me, blocking my path. Up close, I could see that his eyes weren't reflecting light. They were glowing, producing their own pale luminescence. His skin wasn't pale. It was gray, bloodless, like old meat. And when he smiled again, I saw that his teeth were too sharp, too numerous, filling his mouth in irregular rows. "You misunderstand your situation, Mr. Weller," he said. "You accepted the delivery. You drove to this location. You entered our territory. By the laws that govern this place, you belong to us now. Your truck, your cargo, and most importantly, yourself. You are part of our operation now, and you will serve as the others have served." "What others?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. He gestured again, and this time I saw them. Figures emerging from the darkness around the clearing, moving with that same off-kilter gait. There were dozens of them, maybe more, surrounding me on all sides. As they stepped into the light from my truck's headlights, I could see their faces, and I recognized some of them. Drivers I'd known, men I'd worked with years ago who'd disappeared suddenly, whose trucks had been found abandoned or never found at all. They were all here, all still wearing their old work clothes, their company logos faded but still visible. But their eyes were empty, their faces slack, and they moved with mechanical precision, like puppets being controlled by unseen strings. "They serve well," the man said. "They drive our routes, transport our cargo, maintain our operations. and in exchange, they are given purpose, structure, routine. Everything a driver needs. You will join them, Mr. Weller. You will forget your old life, your old concerns. You will drive for us, and you will be content. No, I said, backing away. No, I won't. You can't make me. His smile widened. We don't need to make you. The transformation is already beginning. You feel it, don't you? The confusion, the disorientation, the sense that something is wrong with your memory. That's the first stage. Soon, you won't remember why you came here or what you were running from. You'll only know the road, the work, the eternal delivery that never ends. It's a mercy, really. He was right about one thing. I did feel strange, my thoughts becoming sluggish and unclear, like I was trying to think through fog. But I fought against it, clinging to the basics of who I was. Orson Weller, 43 years old, trucker for 19 years. I had a life before this, people I cared about, places I'd been. I couldn't let this thing, whatever it was, take that away from me. I looked around desperately for an escape route, but the other drivers had formed a tight circle around me, blocking any path back to the main road. The only opening was toward the building, toward the loading dock. The man seemed to read my thoughts. There's no escape, Mr. Weller. This clearing exists outside normal geography. The road you took to get here doesn't lead back the way you came. It loops, circles, always returning here. You can drive for days and never leave. Many have tried. All have failed. The only choice you have is to accept your new role or to resist and suffer until acceptance becomes inevitable. I made a decision then. Maybe it was stupid. Maybe it was hopeless. But I couldn't just stand there and let this happen. I rushed forward, trying to break through the circle of drivers to reach my truck, to at least try to escape. But they grabbed me, their hands cold and strong, pulling me back. I fought, throwing punches that connected with solid flesh but seemed to cause no pain, no reaction. They were too strong, too many, and within seconds they had me restrained, arms pinned, unable to move. The man approached slowly, reaching into his coat. He pulled out something small and metallic, shaped like a key, but wrong somehow. The angles too acute, the surface covered in those same symbols I'd seen on the building. "This won't hurt," he said, holding the object up to the light. "You'll barely feel it, and when you wake, everything will be clear. You'll understand your purpose. You'll embrace your new life. You'll be home." He pressed the object against my forehead, and I felt a shock run through my entire body, like touching a live wire. My vision went white, then black, then filled with images I couldn't process, scenes that made no sense. Roads that twisted into impossible shapes, trucks that grew and shrank and merged with their drivers, cargo that screamed and bled and begged to be delivered. I tried to scream, but no sound came out, and then, mercifully, everything went dark. I woke up behind the wheel of my truck. That was the first thing I registered, the familiar sensation of sitting in the driver's seat, hands resting on the steering wheel, feet positioned near the pedals. For a moment, everything felt normal, like I'd just nodded off during a rest break and was now coming back to consciousness. But then the memories started flooding back, fragments at first, then in a rush that made my head spin. The clearing, the building, the abandoned trucks, the man with the glowing eyes, the other drivers, the ones who'd been taken before me, standing in a circle with empty faces. The object pressed to my forehead. The shock, the darkness. I jerked upright, my heart hammering, and looked around wildly. I was still in the clearing, still parked in front of that massive, symbol-covered building. But something was different. The light was different. It wasn't night anymore, or at least not the same night. The sky above was a strange, flat gray, like overcast dawn, but the quality of the light was wrong, sourceless, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I checked the clock on the dashboard. It read 3:47, but I had no idea if that was AM or PM or even what day it was. My phone was dead, completely drained despite having been fully charged when I arrived. I tried the ignition. The engine turned over immediately, rumbling to life with its familiar diesel growl, and relief washed through me. If the truck still worked, I could still escape. I could still get out of here. I put it in gear and started to turn the wheel, preparing to navigate back toward the narrow driveway that had brought me here. But before I could complete the turn, I saw them. The other drivers were standing in a line blocking the exit, shoulder to shoulder, creating a human barrier. They weren't moving, weren't threatening, just standing there watching me with those hollow, vacant eyes. I honked the horn, a long blast that should have made them scatter or at least react. They didn't move, didn't even flinch. They just stood there like statues, and I knew with sick certainty that they wouldn't move, that they would stand there forever if necessary to prevent me from leaving. I couldn't run them over. Even knowing what they were, what they'd become, they'd been human once, were still wearing human bodies. I couldn't bring myself to commit that kind of violence. So I reversed direction, backing up and turning the truck around to face the opposite side of the clearing. Maybe there was another way out, another road or path through the forest that the GPS hadn't shown me. The clearing was large, and I hadn't explored all of it. I accelerated across the open space, the truck bouncing over uneven ground, and headed for what looked like a gap in the trees. But as I got closer, the gap seemed to narrow, the trees shifting and closing in until there was no passage at all, just solid forest. I tried another direction, then another, circling the clearing like a trapped animal looking for an escape that didn't exist. Every potential exit closed off as I approached, the forest itself conspiring to keep me contained. Finally, exhausted and frustrated, I brought the truck to a stop near the center of the clearing and just sat there, engine idling, trying to think. The man had said the road looped, that it always led back here no matter which direction you took. Had he been telling the truth, or was it just psychological warfare? A way to break my will to resist. There was only one way to find out. I turned the truck back toward the driveway I'd come in on. The line of drivers was still there, blocking the path, but this time I didn't slow down. I accelerated directly toward them, hoping they'd brake, hoping their survival instincts would override whatever control was being exerted over them. They didn't move. At the last second, when collision seemed inevitable, I jerked the wheel hard to the left, sending the truck into a skidding turn that brought me alongside them rather than into them. The trailer swung wide, its rear end passing within inches of the nearest driver, but I managed to avoid contact. And then I was past them, onto the narrow driveway, branches scraping and clawing at the truck as I pushed through. The driveway seemed longer than I remembered, stretching on and on through the dense forest. I kept my speed up as much as the terrain allowed, bouncing through potholes and ruts, not caring about the damage to the suspension or the cargo. All that mattered was getting away, putting distance between myself and that nightmarish place. After what felt like miles but was probably only a few hundred yards, I emerged onto the main road, the gravel track that had brought me here. I turned left, back the way I'd come, and pushed the accelerator down as far as it would go. The speedometer climbed 40, 50, 60 miles per hour, dangerously fast for a road this narrow and winding. But I didn't care. I needed to escape, needed to reach civilization, needed to find help. The forest blurred past on both sides, an endless wall of dark trees that all looked the same. I watched the odometer, tracking the distance. 1 mile, 2 miles, 3. I should have been seeing landmarks I recognized from the drive-in, the collapsed fences, the rusted mailboxes, the remnants of old structures. But there was nothing. Just more forest, more road, more darkness. After 5 miles, I saw something ahead. A break in the trees. An opening. Relief surged through me. This was it. The junction with the county road. The path back to normal roads, and normal towns, and normal life. I started to slow down, preparing to make the turn. But as I got closer, something about the opening looked familiar in the wrong way. The shape of it, the way the trees framed it, the angle of the shadows. And then I saw the wooden post with the rusted metal sign, RR4, Box 127. I was back at the driveway to the building. I'd driven for 5 miles in a straight line, following the only road available, and somehow ended up exactly where I'd started. The man had been telling the truth. The road looped. It always came back here. I sat there, staring at that damned sign, feeling something inside me start to crack. This wasn't possible. Roads didn't work like this, geography didn't work like this. There had to be an explanation, some trick of navigation or perception that I was missing. I pulled out my old paper atlas, the one I still kept in the cab, and flipped to the Missouri page. I found Pershing, that tiny dot I'd located yesterday, and traced the roads around it with my finger. The rural route that led to this address branched off a county road, which connected to a state highway, which eventually led back to the interstate. It was all mapped out, clearly shown, a logical network of roads that should have provided multiple ways in and out. But the map didn't reflect reality. Or maybe reality here didn't follow the rules the map was based on. I looked at my GPS, hoping for some kind of guidance, but the screen showed only a blank gray field with a single blue dot representing my location. No roads, no landmarks, no data. It was like I existed in a void, a place the satellites couldn't see or didn't acknowledge. I tried my phone again, knowing it was dead but desperate for any connection to the outside world. The screen stayed black. I was completely isolated, cut off from any form of communication or navigation that didn't involve directly observing the world around me. I decided to try again, but this time going the other direction. Maybe the loop only worked in one direction, and going the opposite way would break the pattern. I turned the truck around and headed back down the driveway, past the clearing where the building and the line of silent drivers waited, and out onto the main road, going right instead of left. The forest closed in around me again, and I drove with grim determination, watching the odometer tick upward. 1 mile, 2 miles, 3, 4, 5, and then, inevitably, another break in the trees appeared ahead. I already knew what it would be before I reached it. The driveway, the sign, the entrance to a place I couldn't escape. The loop was complete in both directions. No matter which way I drove, I ended up back here. I'd become trapped in a geographic impossibility, a closed circle of road that defied every law of physics and topology I understood. I pulled back into the clearing and parked in the same spot I'd woken up in. The other drivers had dispersed, no longer blocking the driveway, and I understood why. They didn't need to block it. The road itself was the prison. I turned off the engine and sat in the sudden silence, trying to process my situation. I was trapped here, caught in some kind of supernatural or interdimensional snare with no apparent way out. The man had said I would forget, that the transformation would continue until I became like the others, an empty vessel that existed only to serve whatever operation this was. How long did I have before that happened? Hours? Days? Was it already happening, my memories and personality slowly being erased like data wiped from a hard drive? I felt okay right now, my thoughts clear, my sense of self intact. But the man had said the confusion and disorientation were the first stages. How would I know when I started to change? Would I even be aware of it, or would it happen so gradually that I wouldn't notice until it was too late? I needed to stay alert, stay focused, maintain my sense of identity. I started talking to myself, reciting facts about my life out loud. My name is Orson Weller. I'm 43 years old. I was born in Topeka, Kansas. I've been driving trucks for 19 years. I worked for Midwest Continental Freight until the company went bankrupt. I have a sister named Margaret who lives in Omaha. I like Johnny Cash and bad coffee and the smell of diesel in the morning. I am not what they want me to become. I am myself. I will stay myself. I repeated these things over and over, creating a mantra, an anchor to hold on to. As long as I could remember these facts, as long as I could recite them without hesitation, I was still me. I was still Orson Weller, and not some hollowed-out puppet serving an agenda I didn't understand. As I sat there, engine off, I became aware of sounds coming from the building. Mechanical sounds, the whir of motors, and the clank of metal on metal. Whatever operation they ran here, it was active, ongoing. I wondered what they were actually doing in there, what cargo they were moving, what purpose this whole nightmare served. The man had called them our operations and mentioned routes and cargo. Were they running some kind of parallel freight company, delivering goods through impossible roads to destinations that didn't exist on any map? And if so, why? What was the point? What were they transporting that required this level of secrecy and supernatural intervention? I knew I shouldn't investigate, that the smart thing to do was stay in my truck where I was relatively safe. But I also knew I couldn't just sit here waiting for the transformation to take hold. I needed information. I needed to understand what I was dealing with if I had any hope of finding a way out. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down from the cab. The air in the clearing was cold, much colder than it should have been for October in Missouri, and it carried that same strange smell I'd noticed before. Organic decay mixed with chemical sweetness. I approached the building cautiously, watching for any sign of the other drivers or the man who'd spoken to me. The clearing appeared empty, but I knew that didn't mean I was alone. They could be anywhere, watching from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to intervene. I reached the smaller door next to the loading dock, the one I'd tried earlier. This time, when I tested the handle, it turned. The door swung open with a rusty creak, revealing a dark corridor beyond. I hesitated at the threshold, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, to not enter this place. But curiosity and desperation pushed me forward. I stepped inside, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness ahead. The corridor was narrow, the walls made of the same dark wood as the exterior, covered in those same carved symbols. The floor was concrete, cracked, and stained with substances I didn't want to identify. The air inside was even colder than outside, and it carried new smells, oil and rust, and something else, something that made my stomach turn. The corridor extended about 30 feet before opening into a larger space. I moved forward slowly, the flashlight beam sweeping back and forth, checking for threats. The larger space turned out to be a warehouse floor, vast and cavernous, the ceiling lost in shadows high above. And it was full of trucks. Not abandoned ones like those outside, but functional vehicles, dozens of them parked in neat rows like a massive fleet. They were all different makes and models, different ages and sizes, but they all shared one characteristic. They were wrong. Subtly, almost imperceptibly wrong in ways I couldn't quite articulate. The proportions were slightly off, or the colors were shades that shouldn't exist, or the logos on the doors were for companies I'd never heard of despite decades in the industry. I walked among them, my footsteps echoing in the vast space, examining each vehicle. Some of them had trailers attached, the cargo doors sealed with locks and chains. Others were just tractors, the fifth wheels empty and waiting. I tried the door on one of the trucks, a red Peterbilt that looked relatively normal. It opened, and I shone my light inside. The interior was standard, seats and dashboard and controls, everything where it should be. But there was something written on the sun visor in what looked like dried blood. A single word in shaky handwriting: run. I backed away from the truck, my heart pounding, and that's when I heard the voices. They were coming from deeper in the warehouse. Multiple voices speaking in unison, chanting or reciting something in a language I didn't recognize. The words had a rhythmic quality, rising and falling in a pattern that suggested ritual or ceremony. I moved toward the sound, keeping to the shadows between the parked trucks, trying to get close enough to see what was happening without being detected. At the far end of the warehouse, I found them. The other drivers, all of them, maybe 40 or 50 people, standing in concentric circles around a central point. They were all facing inward, all speaking in that same unified voice, all swaying slightly in time with the rhythm of the words. In the center of the circles stood the man, the one who'd confronted me earlier, his arms raised, conducting the chant like a maestro leading an orchestra. And in front of him, kneeling on the concrete floor, was another driver. I recognized him, a guy named Marcus who'd worked for a different freight company, but who I'd met at truck stops over the years, shared coffee with, talked about routes and loads and the general business of life on the road. Marcus looked different now. His skin had taken on that same gray pallor, his eyes had lost their focus, and his mouth hung open slackly. The transformation was nearly complete. As I watched, the man reached down and placed his hand on Marcus's head, and Marcus convulsed, his body jerking and spasming. When it stopped, he stood up slowly, mechanically, and took his place in one of the circles. He was one of them now. Another empty vessel. Another driver for their fleet. I'd seen enough. I backed away carefully, trying not to make any noise, trying not to draw attention to myself. But in my haste, I bumped into one of the parked trucks, and the impact triggered its horn. The sound blared through the warehouse, impossibly loud, echoing off the walls and ceiling. The chanting stopped immediately. Dozens of heads turned in my direction, dozens of pairs of empty eyes fixing on my location. And the man smiled. "Mr. Weller," he called out, his voice carrying effortlessly across the distance. "Welcome. We've been waiting for you to join us. Your truck is prepared. Your route is planned. All that remains is for you to accept your role." The other drivers began moving toward me, spreading out to cut off any escape routes, their movements coordinated and purposeful despite their apparent lack of individual will. I ran. There was no other option. I sprinted back the way I'd come, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I ran, navigating between the parked trucks and back toward the corridor that led to the exit. Behind me, I could hear them following, their footsteps eerily synchronized, like a single organism moving through the warehouse. They weren't running, just walking with that same mechanical precision, but they were fast, closing the distance with unsettling speed. I reached the corridor and burst through, my boots slapping on the concrete floor, the exit visible ahead as a rectangle of gray light. I hit the door at full speed, slamming it open and stumbling out into the clearing. My truck was still there waiting for me. I ran for it, my lungs burning, my legs shaking, and threw myself into the cab. I got the engine started on the first try, dropped it into gear, and accelerated toward the driveway. The other drivers were pouring out of the building behind me, dozens of them, but I had a head start. I made it to the driveway and plunged into the forest, branches whipping and scraping as I pushed the truck as fast as it would go on the narrow, rutted path. I knew it was futile. I knew the road would just loop back, bringing me back to the clearing no matter how far I drove. But I couldn't just give up. I couldn't just accept this fate. As long as I was moving, as long as I was trying, I was still myself. I was still Orson Weller, driver, survivor, human being. And I would keep fighting until there was nothing left of me to fight with. The forest rushed past, endless and unchanging. And somewhere ahead, I knew, the clearing waited. It always waited. But maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time I'd find something I'd missed before, some detail or clue that would show me the way out. Or maybe I'd just keep driving forever, circling this impossible loop until the transformation took hold, and I forgot why I was running in the first place. Either way, I wasn't ready to stop. Not yet. Not while I still remembered who I was. I drove for what felt like hours, maybe days. Time had become meaningless in this place, measured only by the number of loops I completed, the number of times I passed that damned wooden post with its rusted sign, the number of times I returned to the clearing where the building and its nightmare inhabitants waited. I'd stopped counting after the 20th loop. What was the point? The number didn't matter. Whether it was 20 loops or 200, the result was the same. I was trapped, circling endlessly through a geographic impossibility that mocked every attempt at escape. But I kept driving anyway because driving was what I knew, what I'd done for 19 years, what defined me. As long as I was behind the wheel, hands gripping the leather, foot on the pedal, eyes on the road, I was still Orson Weller. I was still myself. The moment I stopped, the moment I surrendered to the inevitable, I would become one of them. Empty, controlled, lost. The truck itself was showing signs of the impossible stress I was putting it through. The engine ran hot, the temperature gauge creeping into the red zone despite the fact that I was barely pushing 40 miles an hour on these narrow forest roads. The transmission was slipping, grinding between gears, hesitating before engaging. The fuel gauge had stopped working entirely, frozen at 3/4 full, even though I'd been running the engine continuously for God knows how long. By all rights, I should have run out of diesel hours ago. But the tank never emptied, just like the odometer never advanced beyond that first 5-mile loop. This place had its own rules, its own physics, and they didn't align with the world I'd known. The truck would keep running until this place decided it shouldn't, until I served whatever purpose I'd been brought here for, until the transformation was complete and I took my place in that warehouse full of wrong vehicles and hollow-eyed drivers. I'd tried everything I could think of to break the loop. I'd driven slowly, carefully, paying attention to every landmark, every tree, every curve in the road, looking for some deviation, some branching path I might have missed. Nothing. The road was identical on every pass, unchanging and unyielding. I'd tried driving recklessly, pushing the truck as fast as it would go, taking corners without slowing, hoping that speed or momentum might somehow carry me through to a different outcome. Still nothing. I'd even tried stopping completely, parking the truck in the middle of the road and waiting to see what would happen. The forest around me had grown darker, the shadows deepening, and I'd heard movement in the trees, branches snapping, leaves rustling, something large moving closer. I'd started the engine again and kept driving before whatever was out there reached the road. Whatever rules governed this place, sitting still wasn't a viable option. The clearing appeared ahead once more, that familiar break in the trees, and I slowed down without consciously deciding to. What was the point of rushing? I knew what was there. The building. The abandoned trucks slowly being consumed by vegetation. The other drivers, waiting with their empty eyes and mechanical movements. And him, the man with the glowing eyes and too many teeth, orchestrating it all. I pulled into the clearing and brought the truck to a stop, not at my usual spot, but closer to the building this time, maybe 50 feet from the loading dock. I left the engine running and sat there, staring at the structure, trying to understand it. What was this place? Who had built it? How long had it been here, pulling in drivers, transforming them, adding them to its collection? The building looked old, centuries old, but the operation inside seemed modern, or at least contemporary. The trucks, the cargo, the whole logistics apparatus suggested something that existed in parallel with the regular freight industry, not something ancient and separate from it. The man emerged from the building as if summoned by my presence. He moved with that same unnatural grace, crossing the distance between us in fewer steps than should have been possible. He stopped a few feet from my door and looked up at me through the windshield. His face was different than before, less human. The features had blurred, become indistinct, like a photograph left in water too long. Only the eyes remained sharp and clear, those glowing orbs that seemed to see through everything, to look past the surface and into whatever lay beneath. He didn't speak at first, just watched me with an expression I couldn't read. Curiosity, maybe, or patience. The look of someone who knew they'd already won and was just waiting for their opponent to realize it. Finally, he raised one hand and gestured for me to come out. I shook my head. He gestured again, more insistently. I stayed where I was, hands on the wheel, foot hovering over the accelerator, ready to drive away even though I knew it wouldn't accomplish anything. "You can't stay in there forever, Mr. Weller," he called out, his voice carrying easily through the closed windows. "Eventually, you'll need to sleep, need to eat, need to relieve yourself. The human body has requirements that can't be ignored indefinitely, and when you finally step out, when exhaustion or necessity forces you from that cab, we'll be waiting. Why prolong the inevitable? Why make this harder than it needs to be?" He was right, and I knew it. I could feel the fatigue creeping into my bones, the fog settling over my thoughts. How long had it been since I'd slept? Really slept, not just those brief moments of unconsciousness when they'd transformed me the first time. I couldn't remember. Days, maybe, or longer. Time was so warped here that I couldn't trust my perception of its passage, but my body knew. My body was keeping score, and it was letting me know in no uncertain terms that I was running on fumes. "What happens if I agree?" I asked, rolling down the window a few inches so he could hear me clearly. "What happens if I just accept whatever you're offering?" The man tilted his head, considering the question. "You become part of the fleet," he said. "You drive our routes, deliver our cargo, serve our purposes. Your mind will be cleared of unnecessary concerns, unnecessary memories, unnecessary attachments. You'll exist in a state of perfect focus, perfect efficiency. No worries, no fears, no regrets. Just the road, the load, and the destination. Many would consider it a form of freedom, liberation from the burden of self." "It sounds like death," I said. "Or something worse than death." He smiled, that terrible smile. "Death is cessation. What we offer is continuation, eternal continuation. You'll drive forever, Mr. Weller. Isn't that what you wanted? Isn't that why you stayed in this profession for 19 years, even when it would have been easier to quit, to settle down, to choose stability over the road? You're a driver. It's not what you do. It's what you are. We're simply allowing you to embrace that identity fully, without distraction." There was something seductive about his words, I had to admit. Part of me, the part that had spent nearly 2 decades behind the wheel, found the idea appealing. No more worrying about money, about relationships, about the future. No more decisions about which jobs to take, which routes to run, which companies to work for. Just driving, pure and simple, reduced to its essential form. But I knew that wasn't freedom. That was annihilation, the erasure of everything that made me human, everything that made me me. I'd be a ghost inhabiting a body, going through the motions of life without actually living, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "I have a different proposal," I said, surprising myself with the words. I hadn't planned to negotiate, hadn't thought there was anything to negotiate. But the words came anyway, born from desperation and a refusal to surrender. "What if I drive one of your routes voluntarily, with my mind intact, my memories preserved? What if I prove I can do the job without being transformed? If I succeed, you let me go. If I fail, then you get what you want." The man was silent for a long moment, his glowing eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Then, slowly, his smile widened. "Interesting," he said. "Very interesting. We haven't had a volunteer in quite some time. Most resist until the very end, fighting against the inevitable until we simply take what we need. But you're offering yourself. That changes things, Mr. Weller. That opens possibilities." "So you agree?" I asked, hardly daring to believe it might be that simple. "I agree to present your proposal to the collective," he said. "We are not a single entity, Mr. Weller. We are many, unified in purpose but distinct in perspective. The decision must be made by consensus. Wait here." He turned and walked back toward the building, disappearing through that steel door next to the loading dock. I sat there, engine idling, wondering what the hell I'd just done. Had I actually improved my situation, or had I just volunteered for something worse than the transformation? Minutes passed, then more minutes. The gray light in the clearing didn't change, maintaining that same twilight quality that made it impossible to judge the passage of time. I watched the building, looking for any sign of movement, any indication of what was happening inside. The other drivers began to emerge, one by one, filing out through various doors and taking up positions around my truck. They formed a loose circle, not threatening, not blocking my escape, just standing there watching. Waiting. I counted them as they appeared. 47 in total. 47 people who'd been where I was now, who'd made or been forced into the same journey, who'd lost themselves to this place and whatever power controlled it. Would I become number 48? The man returned, accompanied by 2 others I hadn't seen before. They were similar to him. That same blur where human features should be, those same glowing eyes, that same sense of wrongness that radiated from them like heat. The 3 of them approached my truck together, moving in perfect synchronization. "The collective has considered your proposal," the first man said, "and we have reached a decision. You will be given 1 opportunity to complete a delivery on our terms, with your consciousness intact. You will be provided with a vehicle from our fleet, a cargo that must reach its destination, and a route that must be followed precisely. You will have no assistance, no guidance beyond what the route itself provides. If you successfully complete the delivery and return here with proof of completion, you will be released. The road will open for you and you may leave. You'll remember everything, and you'll be free to tell your story to whoever will believe it. But if you fail, if you deviate from the route, if you abandon the cargo, if you do not return within the allotted time, then your consciousness will be forfeit immediately. You will join the collective without further delay. Do you accept these terms?" I thought about it for maybe 5 seconds. It was a gamble, a huge risk with unclear odds of success. But it was better than the alternative, which was slow deterioration followed by inevitable transformation. At least this way, I had a chance, however slim. "I accept," I said. They had me park my Freightliner near the other abandoned trucks and led me back into the warehouse. In the harsh, fluorescent light that now illuminated the space, I got a better look at the fleet. There had to be 100 vehicles here, maybe more, representing every era of trucking from the last 50 years. The one they assigned me was a 1985 Kenworth W900, a classic long-nose conventional. The kind of truck that looked like it had been built when trucks were meant to be machines, not computers on wheels. It was in remarkably good condition for its age. The paint still glossy, the chrome still gleaming, the interior clean and well-maintained. But like everything else in this place, it was wrong in subtle ways. The dashboard had too many gauges, displays for readings I didn't recognize. The steering wheel was slightly too large, the seat slightly too low, and the trailer attached to it, a 40-foot dry van, was covered in those same symbols I'd seen on the building's exterior. They gave me a manifest, a single sheet of paper with minimal information. The cargo was listed only as essential materials. The destination was an address in a town I'd never heard of, Crofton Heights, with no state or zip code provided. The route was marked on an attached map, a hand-drawn document showing roads that didn't appear on any atlas I'd ever seen. The path wound through regions labeled only with symbols, no names, no landmarks, just those geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The delivery window was marked as sunset to sunrise, which gave me roughly 12 hours, assuming time worked normally where I was going. "You will follow this route exactly," one of the collective told me, pointing at the map. "Any deviation, any attempt to explore or investigate will be considered a failure. You will not stop except at designated rest points marked with this symbol." He indicated a specific marking on the map, something that looked like 3 circles connected by lines. "You will not open the cargo area. You will not speak to anyone you encounter unless they speak to you first. You will not attempt to document your journey, and you will return here with this." He handed me a metal box, roughly the size of a lunchbox, with a hinged lid secured by a complex locking mechanism. "Your proof of delivery. The recipient will provide what goes inside. Do not open it. Do not examine it. Simply bring it back. Those are the rules. Break them, and the agreement is void." I took the box, feeling its weight, hearing something shift inside when I moved it. Something small and metallic maybe, or possibly organic. I didn't ask. That would be violating the spirit of the agreement even before I started. I climbed into the Kenworth, adjusted the seat and mirrors, and familiarized myself with the controls. It was similar enough to trucks I'd driven before that I felt reasonably confident I could handle it, despite its age and the subtle wrongness of everything. The collective had gathered around the truck, all of them, forming that same circle pattern I'd seen during the transformation ritual. They weren't chanting this time, just watching in silence, their glowing eyes creating a ring of pale light around the vehicle. The first man approached my window one last time. "Remember, Mr. Weller," he said softly. "The route must be followed exactly. The collective will know if you stray. And if you do, you'll feel the change begin immediately. Your thoughts will cloud, your memories will fade, and by the time you realize what's happening, it will be too late to save yourself. Drive true. Drive straight. And perhaps you'll see the world beyond these woods again." I started the engine, an old diesel that rumbled and shook, and put the transmission in gear. The bay door at the far end of the warehouse began to rise, revealing not the clearing I expected, but a road, a real paved road stretching into darkness. That was my route. That was my path to possible freedom. I released the brake and rolled forward, leaving the warehouse and the collective behind, entering a tunnel of darkness that seemed to swallow light. The last thing I saw in my mirrors was the circle of glowing eyes watching me go, patient and eternal. Then the warehouse door closed, and I was alone with the road, the cargo, and whatever waited at the end of the journey. The road was unlike anything I'd driven before. The road itself seemed normal enough. 2 lanes of cracked asphalt cutting through landscapes that shifted without transition. One moment I was driving through dense forest, trees pressing close on both sides. The next, I was crossing an open plain under a sky full of stars I didn't recognize, constellations that formed patterns I'd never seen. Then mountains, jagged peaks that rose impossibly high, their summits lost in clouds. Then desert, endless sand dunes stretching to the horizon. None of it made geographic sense, but I'd stopped expecting sense hours ago. I checked the map regularly, watching my progress along the hand-drawn route. I was making good time, or at least I thought I was. The map didn't have a scale, so I couldn't judge distances accurately. But I was hitting the designated rest points at intervals that felt reasonable, stopping at locations marked with that 3-circle symbol. These rest stops were stranger than anything else on the route. They weren't truck stops in any conventional sense, just flat areas beside the road where space seemed to expand, allowing room for the truck despite the narrowness of the surrounding terrain. At each stop, there would be something waiting. At the first, it was a thermos of coffee, still hot, sitting on a flat rock. At the second, it was a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, the contents fresh and actually quite good. At the third, it was a jerry can of diesel, which I used to top off the tank even though the gauge showed 3/4 full. Someone, or something, was providing for me, ensuring I could complete the journey. Whether that was encouraging or horrifying, I couldn't decide. I encountered other vehicles only once, about 6 hours into the route according to the Kenworth's dashboard clock. A convoy of trucks heading in the opposite direction, 5 or 6 of them running close together. As they passed, I got glimpses of the drivers through their windshields. They all had that same vacant expression, those same hollow eyes. They were part of the collective, running routes of their own, delivering cargo to destinations I'd never know. They didn't acknowledge me, didn't wave or flash their lights, just drove past like I didn't exist. I was glad when they were gone, their taillights disappearing into the darkness behind me. The loneliness of this journey was oppressive, but their presence had been worse, a reminder of what I would become if I failed. The landscape continued to shift in impossible ways. At one point, I drove through what appeared to be an inverted valley, where the sky was below me and the ground above, gravity somehow maintaining its hold despite the visual contradiction. At another, the road passed through a region where everything was tinted a sickly green, and the air that seeped into the cab tasted metallic and wrong. I kept my windows rolled up after that, breathing through my shirt when the smell became too strong. The truck handled differently in each new region, the steering becoming loose or tight, the engine revving higher or lower without my input, as if the vehicle itself was adapting to local conditions I couldn't perceive. I learned to trust it, to let the truck guide itself when my own judgment seemed unreliable. Around the 8th hour, I started to hear things. Not external sounds, but voices inside my head. Whispers that might have been my own thoughts, or might have been something else entirely. They spoke in fragments, incomplete sentences that seemed designed to distract or confuse. Turn back now while you still can. The cargo knows you're there. They're watching through the mirrors. Count the mile markers. You've passed the same 1 3 times. I tried to ignore them, focusing on the road, on the map, on the simple mechanical task of driving. But the voices persisted, growing louder, more insistent. At one point, I was convinced I heard Dean Holler's voice apologizing, explaining that he'd had no choice, that the collective had given him an ultimatum years ago, and he'd been sending drivers ever since to save himself. I didn't know if that was true or just another trick, another psychological assault designed to break my concentration. The ninth hour brought visual distortions. The road ahead would split into multiple versions of itself, each one slightly different, and I'd have to choose which one to follow based on instinct alone since the map couldn't show me something that was changing in real time. Sometimes I chose correctly, and the road would resolve back into a single path. Other times, I'd feel a sudden spike of cold terror and have to back up, retrace my route, and try a different branch. The collective was testing me, pushing me to see if I'd break their rules, if I'd deviate from the route even under duress. But I held firm, consulting the map at every decision point, trusting the hand-drawn lines over what my eyes were telling me. The 10th hour was the worst. The landscape outside the windows became actively hostile, pressing in against the truck, creating the sensation that I was driving through a tunnel that was slowly collapsing. I could hear groaning, creaking sounds, like metal under stress, though I couldn't tell if it was coming from the truck or from whatever surrounded it. The dashboard lights flickered, died, then came back on, showing readings that made no sense. The speedometer claimed I was doing 200 miles per hour. The fuel gauge showed completely empty, then completely full, oscillating back and forth. The temperature gauge was pegged in the red, but when I touched the hood later, it was ice cold. I kept driving because stopping wasn't an option. Wouldn't be an option until I reached Crofton Heights or died trying. Finally, after what the clock insisted was 11 hours but which felt like a lifetime compressed into impossibility, I saw a light ahead. Not headlights or streetlights, but a glow on the horizon, steady and bright. The town, Crofton Heights. It had to be. I'd made it. Or at least I'd made it this far. The delivery still had to be completed, the proof obtained, the return journey survived. But this was progress, real progress, and for the first time since entering that clearing back in Missouri, I felt something like hope. Crofton Heights was small, maybe a dozen buildings clustered around a central square, all of them dark except for one. A warehouse, or maybe a factory, judging by the size and shape of the structure. That's where the light was coming from, spilling out through tall windows and an open loading bay. I followed the map's final instruction, a simple arrow pointing toward the building, and pulled into the lot. A figure stood in the loading bay, silhouetted against the light, waiting. I backed the trailer up to the dock, set the brake, and climbed down with the metal box in hand. The figure resolved into a woman as I got closer, middle-aged, wearing coveralls and work gloves. She looked normal, human, with none of the wrongness that characterized the collective. Her eyes were just eyes, brown and tired and slightly wary. "You're the delivery from the collective," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am," I confirmed. "Do you have authorization?" I wasn't sure how to answer that. I had a manifest, a map, and a metal box. Was that authorization? She seemed to read my confusion. "Never mind," she said. "If you made it this far, you're authorized. Let's get this unloaded." We spent the next 20 minutes transferring the cargo from the trailer to her warehouse. The crates were heavy, unmarked, sealed with the same complex locks I'd seen on the metal box. I didn't ask what was in them. That wasn't part of the agreement. When the trailer was empty, she led me into an office inside the warehouse and retrieved a small object from a locked cabinet. It looked like a gear, brass or bronze, worn smooth by age or handling. She placed it in the metal box I'd brought, and I heard a click as the lock engaged automatically. "That's your proof," she said. "Take it back to them. They'll know what it means." "Can I ask you something?" I said, unable to contain my curiosity. "This town, these deliveries, what is all this? What are we really transporting?" She looked at me for a long moment, seeming to weigh whether she should answer. "Infrastructure," she said finally. "We're building something piece by piece, delivery by delivery. something that will change everything once it's complete. The collective provides the pieces. We assemble them, and when we're done, the barriers between their world and ours will dissolve. That's all I can tell you. That's all I know. I left Crofton Heights with more questions than answers, but at least I had the proof. The return journey was faster, the route somehow compressed, the landscapes passing in a blur. The voices in my head had gone silent. The visual distortions had ceased. It was as if the collective had gotten what they wanted from me during the outbound trip and saw no need to test me further on the return. Or maybe they were conserving their strength for whatever came next. I made it back to the warehouse just as the dashboard clock rolled over to show 12 hours exactly. The bay door opened as I approached, and I drove inside to find the collective waiting. All of them standing in that circle formation again. I parked the Kenworth and climbed down with the metal box. The first man stepped forward and took it from me, opening the lock with a touch of his finger. He examined the gear inside, turned it over in his hands, held it up to the light. Then he closed the box and looked at me with what might have been respect, or might have been something else entirely. "You succeeded," he said. "Against considerable odds, you completed the delivery. The collective honors its agreements, Mr. Weller. You are free to leave. Your truck has been restored, fueled, and positioned at the exit. The road will open for you. You may go home." He gestured toward my Freightliner, which sat near the open bay door, looking exactly as it had when I'd first arrived. No signs of age or deterioration. The paint gleamed. The chrome sparkled. It looked brand new, better than it had in years. I walked toward it slowly, hardly daring to believe this was real, that I was actually being released. But before I climbed into the cab, I turned back. I had to know. I had to understand. "Why?" I asked. "Why honor the agreement? Why let me go when you could just take me like you took the others?" The man tilted his head, considering. "Because the collective values different forms of service," he said. "Those who resist, we transform and utilize directly. But those who volunteer, who prove themselves capable, who complete the trial, we release to spread the word, to tell the story, to ensure that when we need more drivers, more willing participants, they'll come because they've heard it's possible to survive. You're an investment, Mr. Weller, a seed we're planting for future harvest. Go, tell your story, and when we call again, bring us more like you. Bring us drivers who won't resist, who'll accept the offer, who'll see the opportunity in what we provide. The barriers are thinning. The infrastructure's nearly complete. Soon, we won't need to hide in clearings and abandoned warehouses. Soon, our roads will merge with yours, and every driver will have the choice you had. We're preparing for that day, Mr. Weller, and you're going to help us, whether you intend to or not." The implications of his words hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just transforming individual drivers. They were planning something larger, something that would affect the entire trucking industry, maybe the entire world. And by letting me go, by letting me tell this story, they were counting on curiosity, on recklessness, on the same desperate circumstances that had led me here in the first place to bring them more victims, more raw material for their fleet, more consciousness to harvest and repurpose. I wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him I wouldn't be part of it, that I'd warn everyone, that I'd make sure no one else fell into this trap. But we both knew that was a lie. People would come. They always did. The desperate, the curious, the ones who thought they were smarter or luckier or more capable than the drivers who'd disappeared before them. And the collective would be waiting. I climbed into my Freightliner without another word. The engine started instantly, purring like it had just come off the factory floor. I put it in gear and drove toward the open bay door, toward the darkness beyond, toward what I hoped was freedom. The collective watched me go, all 47 of them plus the 3 figures who seemed to lead them, their glowing eyes creating a constellation of pale light in my mirrors. Then the door closed behind me, and I was on a road, a normal road, with normal trees and normal darkness. After 1 mile, I saw a sign, Highway 63, 15 miles ahead. After 2 miles, I picked up a radio signal, a country station playing songs I recognized. After 3 miles, my phone vibrated with a series of notifications, messages and emails flooding in from the days I'd been gone. The normal world was reasserting itself, welcoming me back. I drove through the night and into the morning, putting as much distance as I could between myself and that place. When I finally stopped at a truck stop near Springfield, I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized myself. I'd aged, not drastically, but noticeably. There were new lines around my eyes, new gray in my hair. The journey had cost me, even though I'd survived it. I tried reporting it, of course, called the state police, tried to explain about the clearing and the building and the collective. They were polite but skeptical. They took my information, said they'd send someone to investigate, but I could hear in their voices that they didn't believe me. I tried calling the FBI, got the same response. I even tried posting about it online, but those posts got deleted or buried under so much noise that no one saw them. The collective had been doing this for a long time. They knew how to avoid attention, how to ensure that stories like mine never gained traction. So I'm telling it here, now, in as much detail as I can remember. Not because I think it will save anyone, not because I think people will believe me, but because it's all I can do. I made a deal with something I don't understand, something that exists in the spaces between normal reality, and I survived. But survival came with a price. I'm marked now, changed, and somewhere out there Dean Holler is still working, still rerouting drivers, still feeding the collective. If you're a trucker, if you're ever offered a last-minute route change to a rural address you've never heard of, refuse. If your supervisor suddenly needs you to make an emergency delivery to somewhere off the beaten path, walk away. The money isn't worth it. The completion of the job isn't worth it. Nothing is worth ending up in that clearing, in that warehouse, becoming part of a fleet that drives roads no map can show to destinations that don't exist in our world. I wish I could say I never drive anymore, that I walked away from trucking entirely after what happened. But the truth is, I couldn't. The road calls to me stronger now than it ever did before. Some nights, when I'm driving alone on an empty highway, I see things in my peripheral vision. Trucks that shouldn't be there, running without lights, moving at impossible speeds. I see exits that aren't on any map, rest stops that vanish when I try to approach them. The barriers between their world and ours are thinning, just like the man said, and I'm afraid of what will happen when they finally dissolve completely. When every road becomes their road, when every driver has to make the choice I made, when the collective doesn't need to hide anymore. That day is coming. I can feel it, and when it arrives, there won't be any deals, any trials, any chance of escape. There will only be the road, eternal and unchanging, and the drivers who serve it forever. I got out, but I'm not free. I'll never be free. And neither will you if you're not careful. Watch the roads. Trust your instincts. And if something feels wrong, if a delivery seems too good to be true, if your route suddenly changes without good reason, remember this story. Remember Orson Welles, who drove for the collective and lived to tell about it. And ask yourself if that's a fate you're willing to risk. Because in the end, we all serve something. The only question is whether we get to choose what that something is, or whether it chooses us. The collective is patient. They have all the time in the world, and they're always looking for more drivers, always recruiting, always expanding their fleet. One truck, one driver, one impossible delivery at a time. Don't let the next one be you.